Oh, for the recording. So again, my name is Michelle Flagg. Welcome to the ILCC's BASSET Town Hall. I'm within the Industry Education Division at the Illinois Liquor Control Commission. April is Alcohol Awareness Month, and today we're continuing our discussion from the College Town Summit on BASSET and ways to improve responsible beverage service in the state of Illinois. We'll have opening remarks from Lee Rupus, our BASSET and Under 21 Program Manager. And Lee, you can unmute yourself.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Greetings, and I would like to welcome everyone to the 2021 BASSET Town Hall meeting. BASSET program has been in its 34th year and its 21st year at the Illinois Liquor Control Commission. Since that time, we became mandatory on-premise establishment since 2015, and over 100,000 servers trained every year through the BASSET program, through all you guys and your training and your programs. I'd like to first off like to thank all of you, the BASSET providers and trainers. This program is a team effort. It's a team effort with all of you, the trainers, the providers, the Illinois Liquor Control Commission, the industry, and the local communities. Now we could think back of who knows how many lives were saved through this program, incidents prevented, businesses and livelihoods that were able to be maintained. Today we'll review state BASSET policies, procedures to keep the program running as smoothly as possible. And today we're going to hear from some of the top-notch experts, the cream of the crop when it comes to server training, when it comes to hospitality, when it comes to alcohol policy. We have some of the top experts here today, people I've known for over 20 years now and have just been a tremendous asset to the program. Everybody has, and very, very appreciative of that. Well, before we go to the speakers, I'd like to remind everyone that we'll save the questions after each speaker, and then we'll also have a question and answer period at the end, an open discussion. And today we want to hear from you, what we can do to improve the program, what new things you think may need to be covered as the industry and the times are changing. That way we just stay on top of everything. I'd like to thank our Industry Education Director, Michelle Flagg. Michelle, thank you. She's been here a year and a half, and I tell you, she's been a real asset and blessing to the commission. And she's got some good programs out there, and she's been hitting it out of the park ever since. And she's been a great pleasure to work with also, and the commission's in good hands. Also, Avi Zazuk, he's going to be speaking later on today. He's very dedicated to the commission, and he's been very helpful too. And 21 years at the commission, I got to tell you, this has been the best legal mind I've seen. I can go with him to things, and he gives me a good perspective. He knows the Liquor Control Act, knows the rules and regulations, and another one has been a pleasure to work with. So we're going to first go through some policies, procedures, go through just to kind of remind everybody, just the different policies that we need in place and things for you guys to do to keep the program going. And I'll just present a little PowerPoint here for a second. It'll be brief, and then we'll get to the speakers. Okay.
Yes. Yes. All right. Probably Saturday. Is that okay?
Okay. All right, we'll get this on here. I had this on here, but I could just explain the policies, procedures here today. First off, after you complete a class, just make sure that you send the spreadsheets to the new BASSET email address, which is lcc.bassett illinois.gov. And also make sure that everything is completely filled out. Make sure you send the email addresses too, because we get a handful that comes back in the mail to us. So that way I can email it to the students and they receive their BASSET cards. For those applying for a BASSET license, make sure you have an FEIN number. Make sure you're in good standing with the Illinois Secretary of State's office. So those are just some of the brief things here to manage here, to make sure that we have proper policy procedures, and we put them in the newsletter too, the BASSET issues and information. You should be getting our quarterly newsletter. If you don't, we'll make sure you get on the newsletter list, and that way keep you guys up to date on what's going on. All right, just remember, don't tamper with the spreadsheets. The BASSET cards usually take 2 to 3 weeks for them to get processed, and make sure students give you full information so that way it goes to the right place. And so that's just some reminders there with the state policies and procedures. Okay, our first speaker we're going to go to today is Adam Schaffitz. Adam's the president of Health Communications, the provider of the TIPS program. And I tell you, it's his organization, and we go way back to his father that got server training to the forefront years ago, and came up with a great concept and a great way for the industry and to save lives and keep the community safe. When I first got on board with the commission 21 years ago, first guy I needed to get a hold of was Adam. And Adam, his people have been very helpful, learned a lot from him over the years, and just very thankful for him. And Adam, you can share with us Cocktails to Go, and they Health Communications got really ahead of that program and that issue. And Adam, if we can have you share with us what's going on with that, and tell us more about your program too.
All right, appreciate that, Lee. I'm glad your PowerPoint didn't work, because I didn't put together a PowerPoint, which I wanted to do, and now I realize why, because I probably wouldn't know how it worked. But you kind of led in talking about experts, and I wanted to start off talking about, my dad was considered the world's leading authority on alcoholism and alcohol abuse, and he was this world-renowned expert. And he always had issues with experts, and we listened to a lot of experts today. And he defined an expert as somebody who takes a simple question, explains it in a confusing way, and makes the audience feel guilty for not understanding. So I am not an expert. I feel the people that are the expert, the experts are the people we train. They're the people that are out on the front lines, and we've trained, I think, about 7 million people around the country and around the world. We actually even have trainers in Antarctica. So we learn something every day from the training that we do, because we get feedback from people. So with Alcohol to Go, Cocktails to Go, alcohol delivery, we have gotten a ton of feedback. And so I'm just going to share some of it with you. But just to back up and give you a history of what is called DTC, direct to consumer sales, there is something, and I've got notes, so sorry if I read a little bit. There is this thing called the 3-tier system, which is the manufacturer, the wholesaler, and then the retailer. And that's how alcohol is supposed to flow. And as a result, there are a lot of people out there that are really upset that we're circumventing the distributor or the wholesaler to go direct to the consumer. So this is a very controversial issue, and you may have heard about this already, but it's become concerning mostly to the wholesaler tier. So that's where it's all started out, and there's a lot of controversy over that. In terms of retailers delivering straight to you, DISCUS, the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, claims that there are 30 states that have some kind of direct-to-consumer allowance out there, and have for a while. There are 8 states that have actually, because of COVID, made this permanent. I believe Illinois is one of them. 2 more are working with bills that'll make it legal and permanent. And 5 states have temporary allowances that expire in 2022. So, a lot of people are looking at this, and I'm sure you've all heard about what's going on with the pandemic and the reaction to the pandemic, and it's really made it tough for our industry. And that's something to really keep in mind. Illinois, just to give you some stuff that I've researched and found out, package sales, package store retailers are allowed to do curbside, home delivery, to go, and any other sales that promote social distancing. They do have to have a license for that in particular, and it has to be in the original container, so they can't mix drinks. Other than mixed drinks, you can use a third-party delivery. You can't use common carriers like FedEx or UPS. This is kind of confusing because, well, I'll get to that, but it becomes confusing because there are different jurisdictions with different laws. And this is something that's not only difficult for, delivery, but it's difficult for everyone because the state has some rules. Sometimes the county has some rules, the cities has some rules, townships. I mean, it really becomes confusing, not only to retailers, but also to, enforcement people. And I'll talk about that in a second. Off-premise delivery sales are only, as I said, in original packaging. On-premise can sell spirits only in original packaging. This gets back to something that was pushed actually originally by a lawyer there in Illinois about bottle service to a table. And so that's on-premise. And so I believe, and I don't know this for sure, that they just extended that to allow on-premise establishments in certain jurisdictions to allow a bottle sold in the original container unopened. A delivery person must deliver to the proper person to observe their appearance. This has become a really interesting situation because, if you can't come real close to the person and you're not supposed to, literally come within 6 feet of them to check their ID and other things, it's definitely made a difficult situation in all this. And so we're getting feedback from people saying, this is tough. So tips on delivery: make sure people are trained in proper delivery techniques, making sure they don't leave it, that it's in the original container or that it's in a sealed container if it's a mixed drink. Check IDs every time. I don't care how old the person looks, whether they're in a wheelchair or have 15 kids, you need to check the ID every single time. There's no exceptions to that. It's good to have an ID book with you or an app to help check. And the most important thing, and I know this is going to terrify everybody listening to this, tell them to remove their masks. I have, been to so many stores, and I actually, if I had put together a PowerPoint presentation, I would have shown you photographs of this. I saw one was in Washington, D.C., and one was at a control state. I don't know if you all understand the difference between an open and a control state. Illinois is an open state. A control state is a state where the state actually sells the alcohol. And there are like 18 or 19 of these. In Montgomery County, Maryland, there were 2 people in the store that were obviously underage, and they bought some stuff and they brought it up to the counter. They had masks, sunglasses. You couldn't tell anything. And I'm standing behind them in line, and I'm watching the clerk behind the state store card them, and didn't ask them to remove their masks. Didn't ask them, and I wasn't fast enough with my phone to get a photograph of that. But I was laughing, and she says, "Well, I could tell by their eyes." And I was like, "Through their sunglasses? You got to be kidding me!" And the same thing happened in D.C. at the church. I did get a photograph of this woman carding somebody, sunglasses, mask, couldn't tell who the person is. You have to remove the mask. If that terrifies somebody, sorry, but you shouldn't make the sale if you're not sure the person is who is presenting the ID to you. Also, there has to be no signs of impairment when you make the delivery. It is really, really important if people are hammered. We have this built into our delivery program, and as Lee mentioned, I'd love to tell you that we were insightful in developing our delivery program, but we were already working on it. So that's why I made it so key to get this out. And we had already put our delivery program almost completely together when the reaction to the pandemic happened. And so as a result, it was really easy for us to finish it and get it out there for people. But it is so important not to sell to somebody who's intoxicated. Alcohol cannot just be left there. It must be received by a person. So, it's really funny because North Carolina did a whole bunch of sting operations, compliance checks on delivery people. And it was amazing how many people left the alcohol there with the packaging, which actually, I was talking to somebody who's the general counsel of the California ABC, and he said one delivery place that began with a U, I won't mention them, actually had some kind of policy that they were just doing this. And I was like, you gotta be kidding. And he said, well, we're not really responsible for that. We just leave the package. We don't know what's in the package, so we don't take responsibility. So he cited 10 of these drivers. And so all of a sudden they decided to change their policy, which I thought was pretty hilarious. All of a sudden they became responsible about it. You also need some training, and this is where our program has worked really hard on ways to handle refusals so that you don't escalate the situation, the customer's not upset with you or with the delivery person or the establishment. And that's the most important thing. We don't want to upset people about our establishments. We want people to come back to us once this thing ends, and they can come back into our establishments. But even before that, if they still want to get from our establishment. So it's really important to make sure that you know, you handle it in a proper way that doesn't upset the customer. Customer who orders and pays must receive if they are of age. So that means the person who's placed the order is the person that receives it. You know, we've had all sorts of situations where people say, oh, you know, you're not of age, can't sell it to you without a valid ID. And then somebody else comes up with a valid ID and allows, you know, he says, well, you're of age, so I can sell to you, even though the person who ordered it was underage. So if the person purchasing it is underage, that is not okay. That is illegal. It doesn't matter if it's for somebody else. So that's why in a lot of jurisdictions, you can't even buy something for somebody, even if it's a gift for somebody who's of legal age, if you're under the legal drinking age. Customer who is ordered must pay. I'm sorry. Handling refusal situations. God, I got that in there twice. As I get older, I keep repeating myself. Sorry about that. What to do with undelivered alcohol? This has become a huge issue. Most places are saying, oh, you have to bring it back to the establishment. Well, if it's a pre-mixed drink, the establishment can't actually take that back or can't use that since it's a pre-mixed drink. We've done a lot of training sessions for these people, and the interesting thing is whatever the law or the policy is, the driver considers that a tip. And so I'm like, wait a minute, no, they can't do that. But this is what's happening. So that is not okay. And if people say it's okay, they are mistaken. So keep that in mind, that is just not okay. You know, in terms of Chicago laws, they're a little different. And I mentioned this before, there are the Illinois Liquor Commission rules and regulations and laws that go over the whole state, but sometimes the local jurisdictions have different laws and different things they have to go through. So to give you an idea, God, do I have all these things out here? You know, I mentioned, so all the things that I mentioned are mostly things in Illinois. With, you know, Chicago, they talked about all pre-mixed cocktails to go must be in a sealed, tamper-evident containers. Glass containers are not allowed. You know, so it has to, there's certain things with packaging that are not allowed. You're not allowed to do it in paper, plastic, or foam. So you're kind of sitting here saying, well, what else is there? Well, there's glass, but I thought glass wasn't allowed. Well, in Chicago, glass is allowed. So there's, you know, a lot of confusing things. This is so important to bring up, and you must make sure that you know all the different things and you have it in writing. Probably the biggest thing is to make sure that you are following the best you can. We explain this in our class a lot. The best thing you can do to protect your establishment is to establish a rapport with the local law enforcement. And the reason being is because oftentimes you will make a mistake. And especially what we're hearing is things change with the reaction to this pandemic on a daily, sometimes hourly basis. And people aren't sure what the rules are. Enforcement people don't know what the rules are. And that's why it's so important to do the best you can. And if you already have a rapport with the local law enforcement, there's a good chance if you do make a mistake, they will come and help you out and you won't get cited. I mean, I've, throughout my years training, I've had all sorts of different instances where this has been important and it has worked for an establishment. So it's really important to communicate with them. Sometimes even law enforcement is mistaken about what the rules are, but it's so important to have a good communication with them. So with, as you may know, with the response to the pandemic, heavy drinking has shot up a ton. People are drinking a huge amount more. I've been drinking more. I'm kind of like, it's like mercy sakes alive. It's just something that's really, the more people I talk to, the more articles I've read, a lot of people are drinking more, and it's becoming an issue. And it's going to be a bigger issue once we start to open up again. People get used to those habits. As I mentioned, the biggest complaint that we get from delivery people that we train is the miscommunication that goes on. An enforcement person says one thing, the rules say another, and it's hard to get clarification as to what they do. And what to do. And it's not really anyone's fault. It's just things are changing so rapidly. It makes it really difficult to stay up on these things. And that's why it's really important to do the best you can and be responsible about these things. And when in doubt, don't take the chance. So some questions that we've gotten from people is, if you have a third-party delivery, and you have drivers that don't work for them, who will the liquor board go after? And usually I throw this out to people, but they only have the ability to go after the establishment. So they will go after you. They will also go after your manager. They'll go after the server. There's all sorts of people they'll go after, but they go after the establishment because that's who they have the power over. There's been a lot of talk about how should drivers or delivery people have a permit? I think that's not a bad idea. Is they have some kind of special permit. That's something that's been discussed at some of these, meetings and organizations. How do we make sure the driver's of age? What kind of concern is that? So you've got Lyft drivers, Uber drivers, all sorts of different drivers out there. And if they don't work for the establishment, how do you make sure that they have they are of legal drinking age, and is that a problem? And I would say, yeah, that's a problem. They have to be 21 in order to make a delivery. So what have we had people do? We've actually had people dress up as older people. And this was actually written up in the Washington Post, where people were dressing up as elderly women, trying to get alcohol, and they actually were pretty successful at it. So these are some crazy things people have been doing. The mask thing and not taking down the mask or the sunglasses is, in my opinion, hilarious that we haven't asked. But that's something that's really important that we stay on top of. What if there's a security door? Okay, so when you're making a delivery, oftentimes if you've been to an apartment, you have to have somebody buzz you in. And so, this is what drivers have told us. Well, if there's a security door, I can't get through the security door. So how am I going to make this delivery? And then I have to go inside, and then I'm not social distancing. And how do I deal with that? It was interesting. What if there are other people that possibly are underage, but the person who's buying is of age? Do you leave the alcohol? What if it's a parent? How do you determine these things? These are all kind of things that we bring out through our training that allows you to help handle these situations. These can be concerning situations, but you say, hey, I'm delivering it. They take responsibility. Well, they may, and that may protect you, but it also may not, depending on the situation. And we've had cases before the whole reaction to the pandemic where situations were, that somebody else did get the alcohol, even though you gave it to an of age person. So you have to be concerned about these things, and you have to look for these things. Um, Another bunch of complaints that we've gotten is that a lot of these third-party delivery companies' fees are incredibly excessive, and a lot of them are stopping using them. But if they have to hire their own staff, it becomes more and more difficult. So a lot of establishments are running into difficult situations with these kind of fees, and is it really worthwhile to use third parties? And especially if the alcohol comes back, because they still charge them. I talked about that. And then what to do, probably the other big thing that we've heard back from people is what to do if the ID does not match the person who's making the sale. And that has to be, of all things out there, you know, whoever ordered it has to have the ID, has to be of legal drinking age. Those are all the different factors that are super important to do. So I'm open to questions. You know, I love the fact that I can see whoever's asking me questions, because usually on these things they type in a question, which I don't like. I'd rather hear from you. So I don't know if you have questions or you want me to take questions later. It's up to you, Lee.
I'm going to unmute Thomas. He had his hand raised.
Oh,
and
cool.
Yep, you go ahead.
Okay, great. Adam, it's nice to meet you. I'm one of your trainers with tips as well.
Cool. Good to meet you too.
Well, one is a question, one is a request. Can different information about the delivery of alcohol and all the issues that go along with it, and the to-go alcohol, which I'm getting a lot of questions during the tips training sessions about it. Can you have this put on the Illinois compliance regulation summary? Some parts of it, some of the best practices that you already have?
I think we do the best we can to update that every time we hear something new or something changes. I believe we already have that. The problem is that, you know, we update for the Illinois liquor code, but that may differ with Chicago, or that may differ with other parts.
Yeah, some of the best practices would be helpful, not everything, but it'll be a help to go through it, because we get bombarded with those questions. And we usually use that sheet to cover before we start the sessions. So we can cover Illinois law, state, and then we just let them know the city may vary. So,
Right.
you know, with like age requirements and so forth, age to serve and sell, you know, there's 18 and statewide, but it may vary, you know, from city to city. So that'll kind of help clear that up. But that'd be a lot of great help, because those questions are funneling, because a lot of municipalities and communities are starting to allow to go and delivery liquors, and there's many, as you just walked through beautifully, there are just many issues that go along with it. Of course, too, marijuana now is also added to that, in the impairment issues that servers have to deal with. And we still don't know how to answer that question, because there are legal ramifications. There are, you know, they have the freedom to use it recreationally, but can you use it and then walk into a bar and start drinking? And what's going to be the impairment issues? So that's coming out right there. So I don't know if you're going to be touching on that. And then my final question was, will you be doing a video presentation program, as like we do with the on-premise and off-premise, as far as delivery issues and to go? It looks like that's not going anywhere. This is going to be for the future in the ongoing. Will you be doing any sort of packet that we can maybe do a presentation?
I think we do have videos for delivery. I believe the delivery program has videos, and actually now I remember, we have in the delivery program videos of people delivering. So you should be able to see that. Do you have the delivery program?
Well, sometimes in the sessions we're not able to get to internet, so I was just wondering, would it be on a separate DVD or yeah, something like a drive, because that would be real helpful if we can do that. We'll purchase it. Right. That's fine.
I have talked to Trevor, and Trevor for some reason is having problems uploading that, and he's still working on trying to get that up on the internet. So I believe it will be done shortly, but it hasn't been loaded up. But in terms of the best practices, I will talk to him, and we'll put together something, because I think that's a pretty great idea. And also on the cannabis, sorry. It's a huge issue. You took words right out of my mouth. I'm dealing with this on so many different levels, and I don't know if this is applicable here, but I'll just talk on it speak on it really quickly. You know, we've been going back with a lot of states that have legalized recreation cannabis. It is a huge issue. First of all, if somebody comes in and they're impaired with pot, they're still impaired. It does not matter whether it's alcohol or something else. Pot, if they're impaired, yeah, you can refuse
Correct.
service, and you should refuse service. There are so many different issues with this, with all the different, reactions to mixing alcohol with marijuana. And it's causing some problems, and people really aren't talking about it. We've been working with a lot of prevention groups, and we had brought up in Colorado and developed a test program that we were testing in Colorado, and we got some pretty good responses. And I believe we're in the final stages of putting a cannabis program out there. And really, the people who are pushing for it aren't necessarily the dispensaries, but they're the prevention groups. The interesting thing about that is, I couldn't see the liability, because the liability aspect hasn't reached there with cannabis. I believe it'll get there soon, because there have been a huge increase in problems and people getting hurt with cannabis. So I believe that'll come about, but until that does, I haven't seen a real niche that really fits how we train. And I was approached by a woman who represented a group of dispensaries in Colorado, and she had been tips trained, and she said, what I like about your program, and the biggest issue with dispensaries, is customer service. Establishing rapport with the customer, making sure the customer comes back, getting that personal touch. And she says, you guys do a really good job of that. Of course, you're preventing alcohol problems, but more importantly than that, you're making a customer be able to communicate with you and feel comfortable with you. And that, that gets back to the whole rapport that you establish. And so we are working on that. I don't, I still have my own personal issues with cannabis versus alcohol, and cannabis being legalized and all that stuff. And I just kind of, I could go on for a long time talking to you about this, but we're supposed to be talking about delivery. And I do think that'll be out shortly. And it is a big concern of how to deal with it.
Yeah, just even if it's thank you so much, because even if it's just a few paragraphs to go on the Illinois summary would be great, because we can touch on it and just keep them up to date where it's at. Because a lot of owners, I think it was a session for about 100 for one of the major entertainment venues last week, and that was a question that was coming up, and the owners were interested in that, because they were, it's an issue that's just really building. So having that in the summary is going to be a lot of help to a lot of trainers. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hey, Adam, that was great. And just a question here. I was wondering if you could touch up on documentation, and then after this, I'm sure we have some more questions too. Would you recommend that they take a picture if they deliver a package or a product, or make the transaction, that they take a picture of it just to have it documented? And as I like your program, how it emphasizes documentation.
Yeah, documentation is, I can't stress, and I thank you for bringing that up. Documentation is so important. Taking a picture is a great idea to show that you carded the person who you're delivering. I mean, our phones make it so easy that you can just snap a quick picture. Some people might have an issue with that, and that makes me a little suspect of that person that would have an issue with that. But I truly believe it's an important thing to do. And the reason documentation is so important is because if there's an issue and it results in a lawsuit or a violation, those things take a long time to happen. And it may be a month, it may be a couple of weeks, it may be a year. And so as a result, if you've got documentation of what you did and that you did the proper thing, that makes your case so much more important to defend yourself. So documentation is just uber important for protecting yourself if something should go wrong. So I highly recommend that. And that's a huge part of our program. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Kirsten, hopefully I'm pronouncing correctly, Kirsten Capture had a question.
Castine, go ahead.
It's Castine. It's not spelled at all like it's pronounced, so that is just fine, Michelle. I appreciate it. I did not have a question. I was trying to interject on our off-premise and delivery program that right now it is only available online. It is not a classroom program right now. I think we are trying to put some supplemental information into our off-premise program, Adam.
Yeah, I thought we had added to the off-premise program so that there was classroom that also included the delivery program. I mean, that was the last I had heard. So I remember the last time I shot the off-premise program, or updated, I should say, that we did do a bunch of delivery programs because, there are the third parties, but are the third parties such a large group that they're not part of the establishment? We found that most people that did deliver at that time were in-house people, and they didn't use, Uber or Lyft or any of those other DoorDash, Instacart to deliver at that point. But subsequently, that has been. Castine, you're muted. You're still muted. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm muted because of the echo, but I'll mute again. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I'll discuss that with Trevor
Okay.
and see what, see where we're going with that. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Looks like Bob has.
Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily a question, but I did notice there was a comment in the chat or a question in the chat regarding cocktails to go being legal now. And I just wanted to make sure that the distinction was made between liquor home delivery and cocktails to go. So they are two separate pieces of legislation. Liquor home delivery is set to go into effect in 2022. And then cocktails to go, that legislation is still, the proposed extension has not gone into effect yet. So it's still set, as of now, it's still set to sunset in June of this year.
Cool. Thanks. Did Bob have a question? Can you unmute Bob Poplin? Bob?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. How you doing?
Good, Adam. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
I had about real short questions. First of all, the legality, we suggest that if you get people in front of you, there should be like a plastic barrier for like, larger events when people are coming in, that you can at least see the person. When you're asking a person to remove their mask within 6 feet of you, is that legal? No. The other element is you've got two groups that are really enforcing liquor laws. One's the health department. The health department is a lot more aggressive than the police at times. So that's a major element of risk that's occurred. I've got 2 other questions. Do you want me to just be quiet now and let you answer those?
Just to address that, yeah. It's throughout the states, there's all sorts of stuff. I have heard this from about the health department is pretty militant on some of these things. So yeah. A lot of establishments are like, oh my God, who are these people? And they are very difficult to deal with. Some places, the liquor enforcement people actually do the work of the health department. And it's funny because, with liquor enforcement people, I deal with a lot of the new people that need to get trained, and to understand what goes on in an establishment is vastly different from a public health person. And a public health person has no idea what really goes on in the real world. So it's very frustrating. I've heard this from a lot of people. And while there are those things, sometimes they're telling you not to abide by the law. And it's just like, guys, I'm sorry, this is the law. And if I want to abide by the law, this is what I've got to do. And so it's been a huge frustrating experience for a lot of retailers that I've heard. So, but you have to follow the law. I mean, that's the bottom line. What else, Bob?
It's just interesting how it's a new ball game, especially when you have an element that the fines are so expensive for the vendors because it's an interpretation of a person that really doesn't have much experience in the liquor industry. And that's been a very frustrating dilemma. The next one I was going to ask you is just that glass barrier seems to be a good way of fulfilling the obligation where you can see the physical reaction. When people have masks on, you can't see their nose, which is probably the best defining feature of the person's identity that you can't see. So missing the nose is the only thing that people don't really change on the IDs. The next thing I was going to ask you is proactive versus reactive police calls. As you said, it's good to have a good relationship with the police. Have you ever had a situation because the bar was not actively documenting the police calls, that it came back that they had 100 police calls? Well, maybe 80 of them were proactive to prevent the problem, and 20 of them were problems that occurred in high volume situations. Is it a good idea, do you think, to document the police calls?
It is a good idea to document the police calls, but the one thing you have to remember, I mean, if you're having an absurd amount of calls to the police, then you've got to look at yourself and say, okay, what's going on in this establishment? Calling them a resource helps them out, because if you don't call them and it's a situation out on the road or out on the street, they become overwhelmed. So they're able to often deal with it a lot faster and swifter than an establishment can, because if somebody's insistent on driving and they're hammered and they're stumbling out the door, and they're not listening to you, and you talk to a police officer, those people are going to respond a lot better to a police officer. They may not, but still, there's a better chance that they're going to respond to a police officer, whether it's an on-premise situation or an off-premise situation. They walk in intoxicated. If there are a lot of calls and you've documented that you did the right thing and you called them because you were trying to prevent a situation from happening, I can't believe the police are going to respond negatively to that. And that gets back to the rapport you establish with them. And I've trained so many police officers over the years saying, we'd rather you call us, let us know what's going on so that we can deal with it proactively and not let it become a life-threatening or a horrible situation where somebody gets hurt.
I've seen over the period of time that if you don't document those police calls, and you're doing a volume that's 10 times what a smaller bar might do, well, why don't you operate your business as the small bar does? Well, if you're doing 10 times the volume, you're going to have 10 times the risk in dealing. When you're dealing with venues like that have 20, 30,000, 40,000 people at the venues, they usually have their police department on call. But, for the outside elements, it's another issue of controlling that area, which in some areas you've seen a lot of towns turn into war zones. And that's been another issue, fear.
Right.
The fear that people have.
Right. No, and I've worked with law enforcement in Illinois, and they brought up the same point, is that in certain areas it can be out of control. But the thing that, we all have to remember is about, establishing the rapport with the customer, because sometimes you can head those things off long before they start, whether it's through a friend, somebody they're hanging with, somebody they know in the establishment, whatever the case may be. Sometimes we can diffuse those situations before they become a problem. And that's why how you intervene and how you interact is so important with these people and with your customers.
Yeah, we teach a HAP, which is to help, assist, and protect. That's the intent. And the intent of anything that you deal with is to be proactive versus reactive by giving the customer the opportunity to solve his own problem. And I think that that's one thing your courses do that I've seen, is that you give the customer the opportunity to solve his own problem. And that's one of the best things for teaching that I think that we can do is let people understand that they have the power to solve their own problems if they think about it. But you've got to combat confusion and fear when you're dealing with them and enforcing policies, because nobody likes to be told what to do.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Okay, great.
The last thing is impairment, and then I'll be done. On impairment, we use the aspect of a scab, speech coordination, appearance, and behavior. Those are the things that you check every time you're dealing with a person. When you use the word impairment, which you used, versus intoxication, they're two different words. But a lot of people don't realize that impaired behavior can be fatigue, emotions, psychological, physiological, legal drugs, illegal drugs, mental illness. They're all things. But I love the fact that you use the word impaired because you're dealing with all these other things. But the assumption sometimes is in the public, when you use the word impairment because you're a bar, you're only dealing with that word alcohol. That's not true, especially when you get people that are like my age, older. We get confused, and you have to explain things to people over and over. But thank you again for taking my question.
Right. No, that's a great point, Bob, and it's so important to realize that. And that's why if you see some impairment, you can have a conversation with the customer, and hopefully that conversation will determine whether they are intoxicated or it's something else.
Thank you for your time.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
So next, we'll have, we're going to show snippets from our College Town Summit. During that time, during the College Town Summit, we had Susan Dorick share best practices for checking IDs, and we'll replay a portion of the video, and afterwards you can share feedback regarding how this plays out in the field.
This is how you can get in touch with me. I'll give you this information at the end of the presentation as well. It's as simple as info@id.training. And my goal today is to explain all of the new real IDs that are out there and also their corresponding fake IDs and how underage drinkers and folks are scamming online systems during the COVID pandemic and what we can do to prevent it. So sometimes when we talk about real IDs, we talk about lowercase r, it's a real ID versus a fake ID, or a capital R, Real ID Act compliant ID. And there's a difference there, but the reason that came about is 9/11. I'm going to show you the differences here. So where did all these stars come from? The federal government, when it enacted the Real ID Act, said, okay, these IDs are too easy to forge. We need to have certain rules for these IDs. For example, no more of this nonsense where one person can have 10 IDs from 10 different states, or one person can use multiple nicknames. My name is Susan Fenimore Dworak. I could be S, I could be Sue, I could be Susie. No more of that nonsense. You've got to bring in your birth certificate and you've got to use your real full name. And then they talked about security features. You have to have certain security features on the IDs so that they're harder to replicate, but let me tell you, they're super easy to replicate. I can do it in minutes. So do forgers, even college students. We'll get to that because they do make mistakes, and that's the important part of this presentation. But the federal government said, okay, once your ID complies, that is your state ID complies with all of these parameters, then you put a gold star on it. And some of the states said, okay, other states said, nope. Federal government said, why? And they said, well, if you're not going to pay for it, we're not going to do it. And we can put a gold star in the top right-hand corner of our ID because that's where we have our hologram. And the state said, okay, we'll put the gold star in the bottom right-hand corner. Some states, okay. Other states said okay. Some said, nope, can't do that because that's where we have our signatures or our ghost photo. And the federal government said, well, for heaven's sake, just put the gold star somewhere on the ID. Some states said yes. Other states said, nope, we can't print with gold. To retrofit our printers for gold ink, it cost us millions, and we're just not going to pay that. And they said, okay, use a black star. Some states said, okay. Other states said, nope, we already have black stars on our ID, and if we put a black star, you won't be able to see it. And they said, okay, well then invert it, put it inside of a circle. And the federal government was just saying, for heaven's sake, put the star somewhere. And in my crazy state, in California, they said, all right, that's great. How about if we put it in the butt of a bear? And they said, okay, go ahead. And then Maine came along. So we're seeing all these different variations of ID. My point in showing you these is that the Real ID Act created a lot of standards and had a lot of successes when it comes to real IDs versus fake IDs. But for the people who check ID, for the people who are trying to get training and recognize IDs, it exponentially increased the number of IDs that see. For example, take a look at these Georgia IDs. What's real? What's not real? Is it a gold star? Is it a black star? Is it a little peach? Is it a big peach? Are they both real? Is one fake? How would you know unless someone showed you? The answer is both of these are real. In Georgia, they happened to shift gears. They printed one issuance with gold and then one issuance with black. Okay, but now let's look at another state as an example. So I'm setting the stage here for just how difficult it is to recognize IDs. Look at these Iowa IDs. Which ones of those are still in circulation? Which of those are real IDs? Top two, right? Because they have the real ID star. But wait, what about, is that a real ID? The answer is yes. That is a real ID. This happens to be a real identification card, lowercase r. It's just not a real ID compliant ID. It doesn't have the gold star. You don't have to have a capital R real ID compliant ID in the United States for your ID to be valid. You simply need it for federal purposes to travel, TSA, federal airspace, or to enter a federal building. Otherwise, with a star, without a star, both of them may be perfectly valid. This happens to be a Real ID Act compliant. Here's the thing though, forgers make mistakes with these Real ID stars all the time. And if somebody shows you outlined in green, that's real, outlined in red, like stop, that's fake. If on this Iowa ID, that Real ID star overlaps the seal, it's fake. A lot of forgers are doing that. So if somebody shows you that, you can instantly tell the difference between a real ID and a fake ID. Now, the problem is this isn't contained in a book. The trainings that I know of nationwide are not talking about this, and this is definitely not going to be caught by a scanner. Nor is this. Same ID, tactile features, flat features. A lot of forgers are making these flat. Would you be able to recognize that? How do you know? Forgers do get things right, like the state name. Somebody's got to be able to show you what's real and what's fake, because workers need help in the United States. How can we reasonably make an assessment of any ID in the US when there are over 800 valid versions of identification in the United States? Let me say that again. In the 50 states, DC, and the territories, there are over 800 valid versions and variations of ID in the United States. There's no way you can memorize them from a training. So I absolutely agree, and I agree with Michelle. That was a perfect segue into my presentation. The current methods for checking ID in the United States, which are scanners, books, and trainings, they're not working, because if you and I go to a training, whether it's online or in person for 2 hours or 4 hours, they spend a grand total of about 10 minutes on IDs. There's no way they can tell you the things that I just showed you. There's no way they can present that to you. People need to have regular access to clear, current, and correct IDs. So that's where I come in as a fake ID expert and as the CEO. We are a social responsibility company. We're here to help people check ID, particularly in the COVID pandemic. So we've got all kinds of free resources. If you go to www.id.training, and it's literally www.id.training, click on COVID, you will see a video and instructions and a printable template that anybody can use. It's absolutely free for contactless ID checking. How are we going to check IDs during the pandemic when we can't touch them? And also masked ID checking. It's a great resource for you to share with your communities, however you may want to do that. Email it, post it on social media, contact me, I can help you with it. But the point is, we need to get this information to people to teach fake IDs. Now, one of the big things that's happening with COVID is that DMVs are allowed, some DMVs, not all, some states are allowing extensions on expirations. And this is becoming a problem because we're seeing people get duplicate IDs and sharing expired IDs. How do you know if it's, what's real, what's fake? Well, you'll see on our resources, we have a list of every state and DC and territory of the DMV. You can go right to the DMV site, or you can click on that COVID link and it will tell you instantly how long that ID is valid after the extension period. So we're trying to do what we can to help people during. Now, here's the trouble people are having with scanners. There's no such thing as a high-tech scanner. What is a scanner scanning? For the most part, they're scanning barcodes or magnetic stripes. So barcodes and magnetic stripes are over half a century old. They're not high-tech. I can go to any number, and I mean hundreds of websites, and plug in information, and it will spit out a barcode, either the linear stripe barcode or that, I'll show you in a second, the square PDF 417 is what they call it, barcode with all the little squares on it. There's no magic to it. And within minutes, and this is what's most frightening, I could go online, I could find your real driver license number and address. All of this information is available online. I plug that information into create a barcode, and guess what? It creates a barcode. Either one of the linear, which is a stripe, or the rectangular PDF 417. That is going to fly right through a scanner. And even if it pings the database is going to say, yep, there's a Susan in California with that driver license number. Super easy. Now, what a lot of teenagers are doing is going to places that use scanners that use the magnetic stripe for scanning. So that magnetic stripe there's no magic to it. There's high co, meaning coercivity, low co. There's no magic to a magnetic stripe. It's the same stripe that's on a credit card. It's the same stripe that, for example, is on a hotel room key. Have you ever checked into a hotel? You know, they don't give you the keys anymore. They give you that credit card. You're tired. You get to the hotel. You walk down the hall with your luggage. You get to the door. You're tapping or dipping your card and it's not working. So you got to trudge back down to the lobby and they say, oh, sure. The clerk takes it from you and goes, taps on something, hands it right back to you. That's exactly how IDs are changed So for $20 or so, you can go to Amazon.com, you can buy a reencoder, you take the ID, slide it through it, it says you were born in 1999, you backspace over the 9, you change it to a 7, you slide that ID through it again. Now it's your ID with your photo, your name, your address. It is literally a real ID, but it is scanning with a different birth date. And the problem is a lot of people who are checking IDs using these scanners are not really looking at the human being and checking the ID to make sure that it actually is a real ID. So you may have this other scanner. This is called an OCR, optical character recognition. And a lot of these scanners, by the way, will tell you, you know, our proprietary algorithm will validate and verify authenticity. And what a load. It's doing nothing of the sort. How can a device validate and authenticate an ID? It can't. These OCR scanners, just like the other scanners, it's optical. It's got a little camera in it, a little lens, and it's looking for fonts or patterns, something in the right place. The fake ID manufacturers have this down. Every template for every ID in the United States is available, down to the right font, the right size, the right color, the right placement. So scanners aren't going to work. So what are you going to do with scanners? One of the things I encourage you to do is 2 Google searches, or whatever search engine you use, Bing, Google, whatever it is. Search fake ID, and you will see the number 1 word that comes up for all of those is fake ID, scannable, scannable, scannable. They're all scannable, right? Then I want you to search ID scanner. Pick any one of them. Go right past what I call the shiny happy marketing and go down to the bottom of the page where they have terms and conditions and just look for the word disclaimers, because it's typically written in very plain English. But what it will tell you is, yeah, our hardware, it's got some serious vulnerabilities. And our software that goes with the hardware, it's got some serious vulnerabilities. And if anything goes wrong, like hacking, identity theft, which we know is rampant, Interpol just said it's up, 170% with COVID? If anything goes wrong, we're only liable for the $3.99 that you paid for our app to scan an ID. Or we're only liable for what you paid for this device, this scanner. But those disclaimers are written in plain English. Please go to those and take a look at those, because that's important to know. It's frustrating to me as a fake ID expert to see jurisdictions, whether it's states or cities or someone else mandating the use of scanners because they don't work, and we're really setting people up for failure, right? So you've got to go beyond this, because what's going to happen is if a worker is called in front of a judge for an underage service violation, and that worker says, hey, my city mandates the use of ID scanners. And my company requires the use of scanners. You know what the judge is going to say? I don't care. Because section blah, blah, blah of the state code requires that you properly and thoroughly check an ID. And taking a little piece of plastic and sliding it through a slot or zapping it with a cell phone or some kind of scanner is in no way properly or thoroughly checking ID. You must do due diligence. So we've got a patchwork of legislation, as we know, throughout the United States. We have a patchwork of legislation and rules and regulations and requirements and whatnot in each state, Illinois as well. But no matter what, 100% of our jurisdictions require due diligence. People need to be trained to properly and thoroughly check ID, and they need access to the right IDs. What's happening with scanners? The problem is that the scanner cannot confirm that the data on the ID is real, right? Super easy to get real data, super easy to create 50-year-old technology, and it's put on an ID, and all that information is transferred over Wi-Fi, and that's really vulnerable. So where is it going? Everywhere. It's going all over the world, and it's capturing personally identifiable information, which is setting people up for really serious problems. It's setting the ID holder up for identity theft and other, and it's setting the worker up for, and it's his or her company as well, privacy law violations, and those fines, by the way, can be absolutely crushing. Now, a while back, our federal government did a test, and they put hundreds of IDs online, fake IDs. They created fake names, fake, persons, put them up online, and within 10 minutes, there were over 1,200 attempts from 28 countries. People want our data. Scanning of IDs, people know where to get it. That's why you heard that Home Depot was hacked, Target was hacked, these larger companies, Experian, unfortunately recently Drizzly, because the people who are sitting at home during the pandemic, again, it's not that this didn't happen before, it certainly did. Cybercrime certainly occurred, but they're looking for information, and scanners are a great way to get it. So now where does that data go? When you and I do a Google search or any kind of other search, we're really getting what we see in this iceberg picture, maybe like 10 or 15% of what is on the internet. Everything else, 85 to 90% of what is online is actually under the surface line in the deep and the dark web. It doesn't mean it's illegal, it just means that it's private. So your agency, your university, your police department, whatever it may be, that information is under the surface line so that people can't see it. But the problem is a lot of the problem is that it can't be seen, it can be hidden. So a lot of this does happen, below the surface line where law enforcement cannot see it. This is where fake IDs are bought. All right, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but I want to go on along following that roadmap a little bit more on the trajectory of IDs. What you're seeing here are mobile driver licenses. Now, they're currently being tested by multiple states. They're in use by 3 states, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Louisiana. All 3 of those states have different rules, and they're very, very easy to forge. So here's the situation. We know that there's 2 kinds of phones, right? Conventional and smart. Conventional are your phones that are plugged into your office wall or your home wall. You dial a number, you reach somebody. A smartphone, like your cell phone, has an operating system in it, or an OS. That operating system is what allows your phone to act like a computer so that you can send messages and access the internet and do whatever you want to do on your phone, right? There's 2 kinds of operating systems, iOS, which is Apple, and Android, which is Google. That's it. There's 2 operating systems for cell phones. So you either have an Apple phone or Google phone, iOS or Android. These mobile driver licenses operate very differently on iOS and Android. So for example, iOS Apple, you can very easily screenshot one of these and text it to a friend or email it. And once they get it, it takes literally a matter of seconds of replacing the photo and the text on these IDs. And it's important that the workers know that these, in most cases, cannot be accepted for the for the sale of regulated products, sale or service of regulated product. That most of the time, but not always, people are required to still carry their ID card to back these up. The next form of identification, biodata, we're going to talk about fingerprints. So fingerprint recognition is nothing more than pattern recognition. It's really just loops and arches and lines. And when a machine is reading a fingerprint, it's just looking for the differentiation of it. Being in law enforcement, some of you know that it's very, very easy to capture a fingerprint. You can do it with tape, you can do it with powder, you can do it with glue, you can do it with gel. In fact, the same gel that you use to make gummy bears, you can capture a fingerprint. And when you grab somebody's cell phone, what's all over that cell phone? Their fingerprints. Super easy to lift it, flip the phone over, and use that fingerprint pad to open that person's phone. And then you now have access to their banking apps, their alcohol sale apps, whatever you need. Another thing, if you're interested in Googling it, search the Apple fingerprint spoof. The fingerprint identification on the new smartphones, on the iOS Apple phones that came out, was spoofed within 48 hours of it coming out. This is really easy technology to spoof. Now, last but not least, we have this technology called blockchain. A lot of people have heard about blockchain. It can become very, very complicated and technical, but it's really not. Just as the name implies, blockchain is blocks of information chained together. But what is interesting is, see all the little circles around the center here? Those little circles are the blocks, not that center. With blockchain, there's no central authority. So blockchain is what they call DLT, distributed ledger technology. Let me explain that using an example. If you go to a bank, the bank has a ledger, and it's one ledger by that bank. No matter the branch, no matter where they are around the world, it's one ledger. And it has your name, your account number, and how much you have in your account. With blockchain, that ledger is distributed between the parties in the chain. So there's no central authority like a DMV issuing a driver license. There's no government agency. It's basically a form of self-identification. The last thing I want to mention about blockchain is, you may have heard the term immutable, meaning unchangeable, related to blockchain. Once that data in those blocks is locked, it can never be changed. It's immutable. So if I identify myself on the blockchain as Mary Jones and not Susan Dvorak, and it's immutable, how do we know? And there's no government authority in the middle. There's no central authority determining who I am. It's just the other parties in the chain, like the people who are giving me fake IDs, like the people who are selling regulated product. So blockchain, again, it can get very, very complicated. It's used for a lot of really, really good reasons, but it is being used by bad actors to sell fake IDs and regulated product. So now, let's get down to the practical application. Now you have to buy your fake ID and you have to order alcohol, but you don't want anybody to know that you're doing it. How do you do it? You can create what they call a VPN, which is a virtual private network. You can do it on your own laptop, your own computer. You can do it on your own network at home. You simply have to open an incognito window or open a private window, and it automatically creates a VPN, a virtual private network. And what that does is it hides the IP address. So the IP address is Internet Protocol. Every device that can access the internet has an IP. Your cell phone, your laptop, your Ring doorbell, if it can access the internet, it has an IP. But the VPN is masking all of that, allowing you to operate with anonymity. So it's masking your device. They can't see what cell phone or laptop it came from. It's masking your internet connection. It can't see where you're located. So this is what people use to go onto the internet to buy these products. All right, so now that you're hidden, you need to create an identity. I just chose this as one representative example. You can identify yourself as yourself, and very unfortunately, this is happening all too often with teenagers. The teenagers are giving up their own images, their real name, their real address, etc. It can be very dangerous. But what some people are doing is using a technology like this one. This is GANs. This happens to, I don't want to over-explain this, but and get too far into the weeds, but it's a technology that uses something called discriminators, where it will take 3 different photos, as you see here, find common denominators, use discriminators, and look at that. Look at that large picture on the right of your screen. That looks like a real human being. She doesn't even exist. There is no such human being, but it may be close enough to the person holding the ID. So at any rate, kids are using all kinds of tricks, not only kids, but nefarious actors, as we saw from the tiles before, but people are using all kinds of tricks to create false identities. So you create an identity and then you log on. Nobody's really confirming that it's you. And you can log on as Captain Carrot, Mary Jones, whoever you want to be. Nobody's really checking this, right? So you've created your photo, uploaded it, you've created your identity. Now you need to buy something, you're going to make a payment. Typically when we make payments, we use credit cards. But online, you're not going to use a physical credit card. You're going to use one of two things. You're going to use a one-time, or what they call burner. A physical credit card, by the way, can be a burner credit card. Those are the ones you buy at, the grocery store, the drugstore. It's kind of a one-time use credit card, doesn't have your name on it. Those can be burner credit cards, but you can also get one online. You literally just get the 16-digit number and use it as a credit card, or you can use something called cryptocurrency or cybercurrency. Those two terms are absolutely synonymous. Cryptocurrency, cybercurrency. And you can see here, I've added, I think 20 little tiles here. The most popular of which is at the top in that circle, the B as in boy. That's for Bitcoin. It's got the little dollar sign line. So Bitcoin is the most popular kind of cyber currency. It's one of thousands. People are creating their own cryptocurrencies. You can create your own cryptocurrency. It's just a method of payment. It's a digital method of payment between people that people decide to accept. Now, this is where this ties into blockchain. Cyber currency operates on the blockchain. So you need the blockchain to pay with cyber currency. Okay? All right. So moving along, let's talk about how delivery happens. But I want to emphasize something here. Delivery can happen safely. And during the COVID pandemic, we've got to keep these people in business, right? We've got to keep folks in business. And we can do that if ultimately the person handing the product to the other person confirms age and identity. So I want to confirm that. Ultimately, when it comes to alcohol or any other physical product, one person is handing another person a product. They've got to make sure that that person is of age. So far, everything that I've talked about is digital, right? But there is a physical component to it, and that's when the ID checking has to happen. So let's talk about how the online process happens before we actually get to the physical delivery. So here we have our average American teenager, maybe, in the bedroom working on multiple monitors, right? Multiple monitors in front, monitor in the hand, which is the cell phone, maybe in mom and dad's basement. But when you go online and you can do a Google search for any alcohol delivery, you will get hundreds of replies for websites or apps. Apps is short for applications. Applications can be used on a phone, and they can be used on a laptop, and they can be hidden. Your applications don't have to appear as little icons on your phone. Those can be hidden. But you go to any one of those that you want to use, and you're asked to identify yourself. Typically in two ways. One, they ask you to upload a selfie. And then they ask you to upload an ID. Let me say that again. You go online with your VPN, so you're operating totally anonymously, and you are asked to upload your own selfie and your own ID. It's basically self-identification. And often the same selfie that was used on the ID is exactly the same, which should not be. Right? That should not be, because one should be a DMV photo and one should be a selfie photo taken, I don't know, somewhere in your bedroom or wherever you take your selfie. But the issue with many of these apps, not all, but many, is that if the selfie matches and the ID matches, the order ensues. How is that possible? They're not checking the IDs internally, and that's what they need to do. So teenagers, very unfortunately, are scamming this system at record rates with real IDs and fake IDs, both online and at the time of delivery. Keyword there, at the time of delivery. Okay, so here's one of the biggest takeaways. We can't allow convenience over security. We know what happens when IDs are scanned. The personal data goes with it. This particular scenario that you're seeing in this image is rather frightening to me. A lot of delivery workers are part-time temporary workers. And they're using their personal cell phones on the job to capture personal data. The fact I happen to have two 20-somethings, and the thought of them using delivery and some random person capturing their image, their name, knowing exactly where they live, it terrifies me. I don't want my data in somebody else's personal cell phone. So this is not a great way for us to operate here. So what do we do? What we do is we offer a solution. So we are a social responsibility company, and we created this product. It's available at absolutely no cost. I am not here to sell a product. I am here to help you for free. I am available to you. info@id.training. I will answer any questions that you have. I will help in any way that you have, or any way that you need. We do offer this to government and law enforcement absolutely for free. It's typically $100. It's now down to $10. Don't want to talk about sales. I want to talk about what this app does so that you have that aha moment and you understand the due diligence that this provides. So as a social responsibility company, we're mostly based in Silicon Valley, but we have people all over the country and we work all over the country, and this is online. No download, no upload. It's literally a website. It operates like an app, but it's a website. And it has all 50 states. Those 800 valid versions and variations on all of that information is here at your fingertips. So what happens is, let's say you're checking ID. Somebody comes in, they hand you a Delaware ID. So you click on Delaware. And then you click on the ID that looks like the one in your hand. Okay, it looks like that one. And you get clear, current, and correct images of IDs. Overt, which is overt, just that. Features that you can see immediately. Covert are features on IDs where you need some kind of special tool. You need a flashlight or a UV light or something to actually check the ID, but you're going to get clear and current images of the ID. You're also going to get dates. This is a quote that I've heard very unfortunately all too often, and I heard this from a CEO of a major brand. Thousands and thousands of locations all over the United States. We don't have time to check ID. Really? You don't have time. You don't have 3 seconds because it's literally tap, tap, tap. This is before they knew about this. This was a couple of years ago when I was asking about ID checking. It's a competitive edge. If we take too long, they're going to go to our big box competitor. Well, all right, let's solve that problem. Let's make it as easy as possible and tell people exactly where they can find the dates. Let's give them during COVID a link where they can click on COVID and see what the extension date is. Let's make this as easy as humanly possible, because those of us, particularly those of us on this call, have to create a better standard. We have to hold people to a better standard. These kids are scamming the system at record rates. They're getting alcohol delivered, and they're jumping on the roof of their house, filming TikTok videos, jumping in people, getting hurt. Care. And that's when it's, excuse my cough. Let me get a sip of coffee. I want to pause for a moment, apologize for my voice. You might see some haze in the background. I am recording from Silicon Valley, and we are in the middle of the fires from our beaches to Napa to Los Angeles, and we actually have daylight today, which is great, but I am a little scratchy, so I do apologize to everyone for my voice. So I have a test for you. Which of these holograms are real and which are fake? While you're taking a look, I want to let you know that 90% of the people I talk to get this wrong. What's real, what's fake? Now the technical answer is these are all real holograms, because they are. Holograms, hologram. They're all real holograms. The question is, though, which is a fake ID? Which is a real ID? Most people say the top right. That's wrong. It's the top left. And this is where we come in as a social responsibility company. People need help. We track the real ID and the fake ID market on a daily basis, and we put IDs into the app, into ID.training, that shows them this. Outlined in green, that's the real one. Outlined in red, those are the most common fakes you're going to see on the market. Right now, in that hologram, Caesar Rodney there and the white shirt and the orange pants, none of the fake holograms have that. That's how you tell the difference. So imagine if you had that for hundreds of IDs, just like I showed you that real ID star. If it's got this on the header, fake. If it's not that, fake. For hundreds and hundreds of IDs, updated on a daily basis. That's due diligence. That's what people need. And they also need training. We have videos in the app. I don't want to get into that, but we do have videos that will help people. I hope if so you can check out, you simply contact me or just go to id.training, click on get the app, and I'll get the app for you because I want you to see what it does to prevent the use of fake IDs. Because the reality is the human eye is better than any scanner. It will not catch 5 IDs. We've got thousands and thousands of them. The human eye is the best way to catch the use of a fake ID. The other thing is, if someone is old enough to sell and serve alcohol, they've been around people for a long time. They are a teenager, or at some point they were a teenager. It's a very tribal experience. People, and you can tell from their face, from their clothing, from their behavior, from a lot of different other clues, nuances that you can put together. Like, yeah, maybe this person, I don't know, they're either definitely under 21 or they're definitely over, if you're 35 or older, definitely, right? You can tell I'm over 21. But if somebody's along that edge, we've got to give them some kind of resource that they can look at and check. Because the books, those little 5x7 paperback books, those have 1 or 2 IDs in them. They're very blurry, don't have clear overt and covert features in them. They're outdated by the time they go to print. Those are not working for people. Again, the training, you go to a training for 1 or 2 hours, there's no way anybody's going to be able to show you 800 of anything, never mind 800 complex IDs with hundreds of features on each ID, right? And scanners are setting people up to fail because those poor workers are going to get in front of that judge, and that judge is going to say, sorry, X $1,000 fine, misdemeanor for you. You should have done due diligence. You should have known it. And the person is standing there saying, but I did what my jurisdiction told me to do, and I did what my company told me to do. Again, we've got to have a better standard. So getting back to our trajectory here, the biggest takeaway is the due diligence. For all of these, we need due diligence. Right now, 90% of us are using the plastic ID card. All of these other technologies, the MDL, biometrics, blockchain, already in existence. The ID, with 330 million people in the United States, right? And most of them who are adults carry this ID card. Those are going to be around for at least a couple of decades, especially in smaller communities, meaning not in your cosmopolitan cities. But it's important that people be trained on each of these technologies and they have access to the current information so they know what they're allowed to accept and what they're not allowed to. So the key takeaways here, immediately applicable steps: know the technology, know the hardware and the software, go right to those disclaimers. Do not allow convenience over human training. Don't allow sliding of a card, swiping of a card, zapping a card. We need to train human beings, because the key takeaway is underscored here is we cannot remove humans from the ID checking process. And that is where I'm going to end.
That puts us, so the next thing that we were going to discuss was the use of scanners and other technology, feedback on checking IDs. So a little bit ahead of schedule. Actually, that was scheduled for us to start that at about 11:20. So not too, so you'll be able to get some part of your day back. Lee, I'll turn it back over to you for that part.
Okay, hello. Talk a little bit about IDs here. That's something I've done, work a lot of years in the industry as a bouncer. And, we had to detect fake IDs. We had to learn how to do it, properly train. We've had our Card Hard campaign. It's going on its 20th year. When I first got on board the commission, the IDs were very difficult to detect with the current with the state IDs back then. They're very easy to fake and duplicate, and they had a lot of times they'd paste over the IDs, and they were able to, and the counterfeiters were able to utilize the security features on those ID cards, and then they had to change them. But then that's when we took over the BASSET program and encouraged more carding techniques, checking everything out, and encouraging all to card hard. And one thing is, there's just the different techniques with fake IDs out there. They're coming in from places like China, the Philippines, and usually takes about 2 years. All right, Thomas is holding up there. 2 years for the counterfeiters to kind of get the IDs and all the security features intact. That's why they got to be proactive. And when we got the BASSET program in 2000 and started the Card Hard campaign, a lot of our compliance checks were coming in much better. And I know the city of Chicago has been doing a great job. They've had like a 90% compliance rate in a lot of the areas, and even the state it made a difference. So we'll talk a little bit about IDs. If anybody wants to chime in about IDs and ID checking techniques, and then we'll talk about scanners. There's a lot of times when places think they have the scanners, oh, we don't have to check the ID, we'll just run it through. But when we do the BASSET training, we say, look, you got to go through the steps of properly checking IDs and sizing the person up and making sure that the person has that ID is the person that's in front of you presenting it. Bob, we'll go to you, and if you want to talk a little bit of the dialogue about ID checking. And if we could take Bob off mute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, gotcha now.
Okay. Let me tell you, Susan's program is really cheap and it's really good. I've worked with Susan for the last year or two, and we converse quite a bit. Her program for looking at the small features on IDs is the best that I've ever seen. So if you're foolish not to use Susan. If you don't know it, it's inexpensive, and it's one of the best programs I've seen for your individual employees to protect themselves. The other one now is I work with scanners with Jason, and Jason's program on his scanner, ProScan, is probably one of the best scanners I've ever seen. So the aspect is you're still obligated in any situation to match the person to the document. When you're carding, whether you have an app or a scanner, that really isn't a defense, because you still have to match that person to the document. It's good to show that you're having a secondary aspect, but the major aspect is to investigate the person that gave you the ID. So whatever programs you use, you still have that legal obligation to match the person to the document. The scanners help to show that you did what a reasonable person would do in like in circumstances. It also helps you for the possibility of having problem people and identifying that person. When you get the picture of the person and his information, it helps the police a great deal when they identify something that happened within that period of time, and you identified the person to the incident. It helps them greatly. The most important aspect that I see in carding is like asking simple questions to seeing their reactions. Like most kids will memorize the state capitals and the information dealing with that. But a lot of kids, if they're using out-of-state IDs, don't know the county that they're in. So just by asking them, if you live there all your life, yeah, okay, well, they should know the county they're in. So I ask them, well, what county are you in? And they can't do it. The other thing is, one of the other carding techniques is asking them, well, I don't think we don't think this is you, just to see what their reactions are. It may or may not, because the IDs are so good, and a lot of the IDs read on scanners, but you still have to match the person to the document. And you have to take the time to do the right thing. And I find questions are the easiest way, but the hardest thing that we have right now is the mask. You can't, by their body language, see what the reactions are with the mask on, and you can't match the person to the document. So the biggest question I have is with health departments and police departments within a 6-foot radius, when you ask them to take the mask off, are you possibly putting yourself at risk? I don't think the laws define or giving the venue the right of protection in doing their due diligence. Okay, thank you. You better rate me. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
And,
Yeah, go
and
ahead,
Bob,
Michelle.
I'll look back to check which newsletter, but our enforcement division did come up with a kind of a graphic to show the other features to look at when looking at someone that is wearing a mask. But you're right, the nose and some of the other features that are distinct, those are things that are covered by the mask. But I'll look for that, and I'll share a picture of that was that.
Yeah, and another important thing that Bob mentioned was body language, reading body language, and that's one thing we've always encouraged. And I still do work security, and a lot of times we got to read body language. We got to check the proximity, how close the person may be, where they place their hands, their breathing patterns. Sometimes the underage kid will look nervous, breathing a little bit heavier than usual, and they're not making direct eye contact. Those are just some of the things, nonverbal behaviors that we can check out, when we first initiate the person asking for that ID, and using the proper techniques, sizing up the customer, make them take the ID out of the wallet or purse, make them hand it to you physically. I've gotten questions where, what if somebody has a picture of their driver's license on their cell phone? No, don't take it unless you get an actual ID. So that's just some of the aspects there when it comes to carding. If anybody out there, and with the scanners, they can also they can also scan the proper information. But that's why they've got to do the proper carding techniques too while checking. Also use of ultraviolet lights too. That's whatever tools that they can use. That's what we encourage the licensed establishments, the bouncers, security detail, the servers to have access to, and also ID checking guides. Thomas, did you have something?
Yeah, and also when we're teaching in-class training, one of the things I stress to the servers and particularly to the bartenders, that even though we have scanners and equipment and security checking IDs at the door, it's a caution. Ultimately, it's still the responsibility of the person who's either delivering the alcohol, passing the alcohol, or actually making the sale to still check ID. So even though they're checking IDs at the door, it's still recommended that if you have any doubt, still check the person's ID. Mistakes can happen, and if there's a dram shop or a liability issue, it's going to not fall to security, it's going to fall to the server and the seller who actually
Right.
served and delivered the alcohol.
Yeah. Okay, Bob.
And it was in the third quarter newsletter. If anyone wants to go back and see the graphic of the items to look at when checking IDs during COVID.
And I got to also add that Michelle's done an awesome job with the newsletter.
Yeah.
Okay, I think Bob.
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. With ProScan, they have a feature on documentation that you can print out a notice that they know that their risk for catching the virus is there, and they have a hold harmless agreement on some. I don't know the legal standing on that, but at least it shows that people entering were warned about the possible the possibility of being exposed for the virus. And this is going to be with us for at least another year or two. So it's just interesting to see how that's going to go, as well as the due care that you're obligated to give to your employees and the due care you're obligated to provide for your people entering, especially on that 6-foot variance at entry. I find some of these legal obligations real tough when you got 10,000 people waiting to get into an event. I'm done.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have anything to say about IDs? We can keep the discussion going on this.
There's a question regarding, is it still June for accepting expired IDs?
I believe so. I think if Avi is still on, if you can verify that.
Every state has a different period of time, and it's always good to check with what the governor has decided to do. A lot of times they say, well, after the pandemic is deemed not to be a problem, you have 2 months or a month after that aspect before the IDs have to be current. And it's confusing because some states say that, well, now the pandemic is over, or that you now have to get your license renewed. It's best to go to the state, because each state is different in the way that they handle that. And I don't know how to answer that other than to say that it's a state by state issue.
Yes.
This is Avi. I just looked it up, and the Illinois Secretary of State for Illinois extended driver's licenses to August 1st. That's as of a couple weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
I can tell you on the issue of, every state has a different expiration date. What we have been advising as the ILCC is we are only, officially saying the Illinois driver's licenses and state IDs. If other states are extending, that is their prerogative. But we're not going to put out a statement as to the other state, as to what other states are doing. So you're kind of going to be at your own, it's your own concern. And it's, take it as it may. If you end up selling to a minor with a expired ID from another state, you're going to have to prove that ID was actually technically valid from the other state. As opposed to an Illinois driver's license, we're going to assuming that it's a legitimate driver's license, we're going to say it's not expired.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Avi.
And I was going to add to that, there are some apps, and if I remember correctly, the program that Susan uses, it had a link to the various secretaries of state, but that is something that servers would need to balance in terms of, if lines are long, going over and checking, does this state extended? Did this state extend it? But you want to do your best, and it may be a good practice for your servers to review it maybe once a week, or in your weekly meetings that you have with staff, to go over. We're in Illinois, but we receive a lot of Indiana customers. So to become familiar with Indiana or Wisconsin or something like that. So just to, not to say that you have to check every state and check every box and always be on top of every change and extension during this time, but, it would be best practice to, if you receive a lot from other states, to at least keep up with what that other state is doing.
Yes, Bob.
Would have you guys posted that statement about out-of-state IDs on the website? That the out-of-state IDs that are expired from other states are not valid for a legal defense in the state of Illinois. Is there any impetus for that, or it's just that you're not accepting them? The fact that they may be used as a defense from that state as being deemed valid, but you're not. If they had a incident involving a minor and you use that for a defendable position in court and it turned out not to be that person, they wouldn't have that defense. Is that correct?
So, we just indicated that Illinois licenses are okay.
No, I'm talking
because
about
all we can do is
Oh, yeah,
verify Illinois licenses and IDs. Other state licenses, if the other state has extended those licenses or those IDs, it would be a valid defense. It would just be on the licensee to actually, or it would be on the on the seller or the business to have to provide proof that it is that it was a valid license at the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it says that in your statement there that you're saying it's not a valid ID for them to accept, and yet to defend themselves it might be. It's just a confusing conundrum in dealing with what the intent is.
Well, I mean, we're really just doing it to Illinois is our most common ID, and therefore that's what we see. That's what we see, and therefore we're citing to what we know is valid. We're not going to start putting on the website and you guys have the same problem, putting a 50-state survey of which driver's licenses and IDs have been extended. And then if you even get farther to, other IDs that are valid IDs, from, other government issued IDs that are valid IDs and which ones of those have been extended, it kind of, it gets very, it gets too far. But what we can do is we can say the most common ID that we see in Illinois, which has been extended, is the Illinois driver's license, Illinois state ID.
Thank you so much.
And that's what we've indicated.
Thank you so much.
Other state IDs would be valid if, we're just not going to go through the research and effort to prove that ahead of time.
Well,
the business is more than welcome to prove that themselves.
So in other words, if the vendor feels that that's a legal document, it's okay for them to accept it.
In just the same way as, anytime they see a license, right? There's a certain degree of, is it legal or is it not? They do their due diligence to make sure that it is legal. And then ultimately, if it ends up coming out to be a really, really good fake ID, right? They'll end up, likely not being held accountable for it.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, looks like Thomas.
Yeah, Lee, I got a question. So, just in harmony with this, so you got to keep something in mind when we're doing the in-class training or even online. Many of the licensees are looking to us as the experts, ask us to, if we can accept an expired ID because the DMV right now is, because of COVID, they're closed, so they're not able to accept it. Or, for instance, in those cases with the secondary forms of ID, such as the gun licenses or the carry and conceal license, is that acceptable form? So what I've been doing, because they, we can say something at the state level, but maybe the local city is a no. So I've been directing them to their local city village hall liquor control there, and that way it's a little bit more clear, because I don't want to say yes and then they get in trouble. As Bob was saying, it could become kind of confusing on what we can and can't. They're looking at us to say yes or no, so that the liability now falls upon the trainer, and that's really not the case. I kind of direct them the right way. I'm just directing them to their local village hall to see what their local city code is. If none, then state law and whatever guidelines apply. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's always good to hit up the locals first, just to make sure, because here it's a bifurcated system here in the state of Illinois. You got two masters to serve, the local and the state. But yeah, just it's always good to refer to the locals first. And then if, if they trust the establishments to set their own carding policies, which fall in line with state law, state practices, then by all means, just continue to teach proper carding techniques and using common sense.
Yeah.
All right. Bob, did you have another?
Yeah, just the comment that you just made is just perfect, and it basically states that you've got three regulatory issues, and one is the state, the next is the county, next is the city, but the most important is your house policies, and your house policies can be stricter than state law or city ordinances after it's been explained to the customer what they are. And I think that house policies, posting and explaining that to the customer as to what your policies are the biggest and most important thing, because it gets customers to communicate risk to you. And that's the greatest resource of preventing the opportunity of risk, is the communication factor between the servers and their patrons. That is the most important, in educating patrons how to communicate to your staff eliminates the opportunity of risk. So the only thing you can really control is the opportunity, and by golly, by gosh, that's a great statement. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, the house policies are very important. A lot of places I worked at, security, they had the house policies posted. That way eliminates all confusion, and the staff and employees are able to refer to those as they're posted inside the establishment. Okay. All right. Anything else?
I was just going to give another plug to our newsletter. In the most recent newsletter, first quarter for 2021, Lee has an article on house policies and just some things to consider. And we talked about importance of documentation earlier, and that's also covered in our newsletter as well. So, and I'm taking note of emails in the chat, and I'll add those to the mailing list for, so you'll be able to receive future newsletters, but they're also on our website.
Yes. Okay. All right. Okay, if Bob.
Yeah, she brought up the aspect of bottle service, and that's one thing that most people don't understand, and the elements of the customer delivering alcohol to other customers is horrendous when you get into the nightclubs where the tables go for $10,000 a piece, and it's a real prestigious aspect of nightlife is sometimes just having a table in the VIP. But bottle service is one of the things that isn't defined by law or by application. And there are very few states that ask for control in dealing with this very horrific at-risk policy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember 2003 is when Illinois passed the law that would allow bottle service. And in the beginning, they did, when I first got on board the commission, yeah, it was like a taboo thing. But then in 2003, the law was signed to allow bottle service in the establishments. And however, again, on a local level, local ordinance can say, hey, look, we don't want this in our community. We don't want this in our town. They have the prerogative to do that. Yes, Charlie.
Yeah, just to what you had just said about, you are absolutely right that towns have the prerogative to to not allow the bottle delivery service, the liquor delivery service in their town. The problem is that within the statute itself, and I've been reading several different interpretations of this over the past couple of weeks, what they can't control are people going to outside of the town delivering in. So if any town in Illinois decides that they don't want to allow liquor delivery in their town, they have that prerogative and they can override what it is that the state has passed. However, if they want to go next door to B-Town in order to be delivered to their house, they can do that, and there's nothing in the statute right now to stop that or to even penalize that.
Right. Thanks for adding that. Thank you.
Lee, I just got a quick question for.
Sure.
What's been the latest? I'm just curious with Dram Shop. Have the commission been having a lot of Dram Shop penalties and cases as of recently in the state? There have been any hot spots or issues where there have been a buildup of penalties clamping down on businesses when it comes to Dram Shop right as of late?
Not to my knowledge. Avi, have you seen anything?
Well, the biggest thing I've seen is unsafe premises, and you're going to have more liability. I think the Illinois Dram Shop, I think, went up to $69,000 is the amount of the reward. So that basically is not a high risk situation for bars or restaurants to take with that lower retainer. Most states or a lot of states have higher, if not no limits. And when you have no limits, it's different. But most Dram Shop cases I see in Illinois are sued under unsafe premises. Yeah, they're going to get a lot more money that way. And I've seen a couple $2 or $3 million awards in Illinois from unsafe premises. And some of those have been adult entertainment venues.
Well, unsafe premises, what do you mean, Bob? I never heard that term before, unsafe premises.
Well, unsafe premises means that you're operating at risk and in violation of what your training was. And when you have a training standards or the city gives you guidelines, those guidelines can be accepted as a way of conducting your business. And if you say that with your liquor license, we're going to run our business this way, they can say that you're operating outside the realm of the expected behavior that you're supposed to have. So they want to prove that your business is a risk. And that's why police calls can be so important, is you have to document proactive versus reactive. Proactive means you're calling the police to prevent the opportunity of the risk. Reactive means it occurred. And having the documentation helps to defend you in a Dram Shop claim, showing that you respond to risk and you call the police when needed to prevent the opportunity of it. You're not going to prevent that, but if you say you can predict violence, then you're going to get sued for it. You can only control the opportunity of it. So I guess, does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I was just wondering because that comes up when we're doing the in-class trainings on what kind of issues and how the server is going to be held liable. And we're just wondering, has Illinois been pushing? I know COVID is hindered back a lot, but have they been pushing forward for more compliance checks? Have there been more issues where the control had to come down to businesses and shut them down? Those are the kind of issues that I was asking about. Have any of those occurrences been happening? And I guess you would gauge that at the commission if you've been getting, any sort of violations. How many violations have you been getting? Well, not total number, but have you been getting a lot of violations as of recently, or that has slowed down?
So I want to point out, I guess there's two different aspects, right? There's the Dram Shop liability, which is the third party injury liability.
Correct.
The commission actually doesn't track those because that's a civil. It's a civil liability situation. I can tell you from conversations that I've had with other attorneys around the state, especially attorneys who handle DUI defense, that the DUI defense, for the most part, is a very, very poor business model right now, just because over the last year, the sheer number of DUIs has plummeted. Because of the closure of bars and restaurants. And that's, I think, the vast majority of Dram Shop related claims are, somewhat are DUI-like events. in general, in terms of overall enforcement of, what's going on, violations of the liquor code, it's, been a pretty consistent, nothing over, no one has been, it's not been a, greater or, or lesser year, with the exception of, there was some COVID compliance violations. Those, did shoot through the roof. And in terms of just what Bob was mentioning, the unsafe space, I have seen some civil cases where instead of going at least in Illinois, instead of going after the dram shop insurance coverage, which again is limited to, that $69,000 range, they go after their general liability insurance. So you maintained an unsafe environment, which led to the accident. It wasn't per se a liquor accident. It's just more of a dram shop. It's more of a, general liability that you should have maintained a safer premises, and therefore you're able to get much higher awards in the process.
So while you're right there, has there, to your knowledge, and this is just a good question for me, from your knowledge, has law enforcement or attorneys around the state have been talking about tracking, like for instance, when there's a DUI arrest, I just noticed that I don't see a lot of heavy level of tracking where the alcohol came from the person who was arrested for the DUI, and then tracking it back to the bar to where that person has consumed it. You think that ever is going to pick up? I
know that I actually had a conversation with one of our enforcement supervisors yesterday about this, idea of, and to a certain degree, it's very much, agency, arresting agency dependent, whether or not they choose to track back where the source of the alcohol is. I mean, generally, when a DUI arrest occurs, one of the questions that is asked by the police is, where did you have your last drink? When did you have your last drink? But, it kind of, to a certain degree, depends on the, staffing and, just overall, the overall workload that police agency has as to whether or not they're going to, take it back to the establishment and then issue a, subsequent, violation to that establishment. It's kind of one of those things where, because of the bifurcated nature of, you've got, hundreds of police agencies handling that around the state. It's just a communication and coordination issue.
Yeah, I think it needs to happen a lot more. I think that's something that should come up. Fear sometimes is a good parameter for prevention, in my opinion. And I remember a case about a year ago to this time. A young lady was walking to high school at Oakland right before COVID broke out, and she was about 16, and she was heading to class. And there was a gentleman early in the morning, was so intoxicated, and he hit her, tore her up to like about 15 feet into the air. Kept going, hit 3, 6, 4 cars, went on a speed chase with the Oakland police and got other communities involved. And for the first time, at least from a news standpoint, I seen the police were so furious that they spent most of their time through the day trying to drill him to find out where did he consume his alcohol. That's one of the biggest areas that they were looking for. And I think he still fought. I don't know if it ever came out. They wanted to go back to track. He just shouldn't have been in a condition that early in the morning. They knew he had to get it from some sort of bar. So I think that would be a great help if, especially if there's any law enforcement listening, that would be a great help just to throw some fear, go back to some of these places, even start an investigation if it doesn't go far enough. That'll just put a little bit more alertness to service staff around the state. Hey, you need to be awake. You need to be, doing a lot more about recognizing the effects of how the alcohol that you're serving is having, the impact that it's having on your consumers and what they're going out to do when they drive and leave your establishment. This needs to happen a little bit more, and I don't think it's happening enough.
Right. And Bob, did you want to add to that?
I just wanted to say the biggest issue is off sales have bloomed. And there are about 4, I think, or 5 states that have started to mandate delivery courses for people that are delivering that. We're approved in Georgia, and we have a delivery course there for people that are delivering, and I think that's going to be a big deal. The opportunity, because of the cost when you're dealing with delivery services and the charges, it explodes quite a bit. So giving the independent owners the opportunity for them to deliver their own food and alcohol is a really good idea. The other aspect of that in dealing with that is the response of domestic problems has increased dramatically because of the amount of alcohol people are drinking at home. So the police calls from bars have gone now to the police calls to homes. And the insert of the economic opportunity of tippling houses is exploding. And at the tippling houses, you have the illegal alcohol being sold in warehouses and serving areas where they just have rotating locations, and the activities are alcohol, drugs, and sex. So you have a dynamic prohibition that's occurring right now, that's occurring in every city, big city especially. It's a reaction to the control of not having an opportunity to communicate with people, and that lack of communication is increasing the opportunity for illegal profits.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Okay, before we move on to the next section.
One quick thing, Lee.
Yes.
Thomas, if you could send me an email, because we're also working with the Illinois Impaired Driving Task Force and improving, suggestions, etc., changes within BASSET and rules and regulations. That's a priority for them as well. And I'd like to share your suggestion and comments with
I would
them.
love to.
We have a meeting tomorrow. So please email me, and I'll put my email in the chat for you.
Oh, perfect. I would do that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Years ago, when I started, the Illinois State Police had the last drink program, where they would stop intoxicated drivers on the highway or on the roads, and then ask, where was your last drink? Where'd you have your last drink at? Then they pay a visit over the establishment, and then, zing them for over serving. So I remember we had that, and again, I feel that should be a common practice too. Also, when we talked about dram shop lawsuits, the biggest one I heard of in my history of work at the commission was in 2003, the E2 nightclub incident. And that got nationwide attention, where a fight broke out. They used pepper spray. It got into the ventilation system of the nightclub, and people were trying to rush out of there. Instead of the doors opening outwards, they opened inwards from the inside, and 21 people were trampled to death. And the ironic thing is 4 out of those 21 were underage, and 3 of them did not have IDs on them. So that was a huge lawsuit on that. Lives were taken, and the guys lost their business in lawsuits, and it was just very, very devastating. So,
yeah, and some of the effects of that lawsuits are still going on to this day.
Wow,
just finishing up right now recently.
17 years later, that's something. Okay. Okay, Bob, real quick, and then we got to move on.
On that lawsuit, it came from the DJ, it was a girl and fighting with an off-duty police officer, and the DJ's comment was, I think, the one that what the DJ said created a great deal of risk. But the aspect of that occurring was that you had so many people that now are faced with the way that people are dispersed from events, that the fact that the riskiest aspects of getting trampled in the way that they're leaving is the biggest risk that occurs in a lot of the major venues, is people getting trampled to death.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Ready to go on to our next section. We're going to talk about off-premise. And Michelle, is there anything you need to add?
Nope,
Okay.
nope, you're good.
Okay. All right, next speaker, he's been around this program, I think, since the beginning. He's been very good guy, another guy I can bounce ideas off, and he also has some good insight. He always catches those blind spots too. And we're very happy to have him, and he's been another blessing to the program. Charlie Mormino is going to talk to us about some off-premise training. And he's got an instructor training program as long as been teaching BASSET. Like I said, since its inception, I think he's been around since then, and he's one of the guys I met when I first got on board. So Charlie, want to thank you for presenting to us today, and go ahead, take it away.
Thanks for aging me, pal. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I am Charlie Mormino, Director of Training and Development with CBB Consulting, which is my company that I founded in 1994. I'm a 37-year veteran of the hospitality industry. I have been a BASSET instructor since 1996. And I am also a multiple-time restaurant, bar, and club owner over the years, and a 26-year consultant. So one or two years in here of doing all of this. I'd like to thank you, Lee, for inviting me today to speak. Michelle, can I share my screen?
I made you a presenter, so you should be able to.
Thank you so much. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, terrific.
All right.
So the first thing that I want to address today before we even get started is let's define off-premise in its entirety and in its clarity, so we all know what we're talking about. By Illinois law, off-premise operator is one that's licensed to sell alcohol for the purpose of off-premise consumption only. Packaged goods, this type of liquor license is specifically designated for retail operators. By state statute, BASSET training classes for off-premise operators are 3 hours in length, as opposed to on-premise operators that have to do BASSET training, which is 4 hours in length. Now, I clarified this in the beginning for a reason. We need to make sure that we understand that we have two different types of liabilities between off-premise and on-premise when we're talking about the issues, but it's the same product. And that's the thing that I have to make clear before we proceed on in this presentation is both sides, on-premise and off-premise, are selling the same product, but we unfortunately have a couple of different circumstances for the two sides. July of 2015, BASSET gets mandated. Lee and I had waited for this for a long, long time. It was something that we had advocated for forever. And it was a rollout from the time that it was initiated, as you all know, based upon the population of counties. So the most densely populated counties came in that first year, and then so on into the third year. In 2015, happy hour was reinstituted in the state of Illinois. That's for a different conversation, but that was another big event that happened at that exact time. However, with the BASSET mandate and the rollout, off-premise operators were excluded. On-premise operators, as you all know, were mandated throughout the state to have BASSET instruction. Anything outside of Cook County, you had to renew that BASSET certification every 3 years, inside of Cook County every 2, but the off-premise operators were excluded from that happening. Now we move ahead to 2018. By this point, all Illinois counties are now completely under the mandated law, and they have to provide BASSET training to their selected employees that fall under the mandate, but off-premise operators still by 2018 are not required to have their BASSET employees trained. Now, my company did a survey. It was actually a research project, and we did it because we have a lot of some of the largest retailers in the country that we've been doing business with for a long time that have proactively been teaching their people the BASSET program for well over a decade, well before it was mandated or anything like that. And so we were trying to answer the question that they had about how many Illinois communities, now that it's mandated throughout the state, how many Illinois communities have included in their statutes off-premise operators as opposed to on-premise operators lumped in together. And our survey that we conducted, where we went through just about every town that we had the availability to look at their statutes, their local ordinances, 41% only by 2018. So BASSET has now been mandated throughout the state for all on-premise operators, but only 41% of local community statutes had also included off-premise operations for also needing to be mandated training to get the BASSET instructor, to get the BASSET training for their people, or an alternate approved program. So tips, serve safe, things like that. Now we move ahead to 2020, gigantic Pandora's box being opened, where recreational marijuana in the state of Illinois is legalized. This opens up all sorts of new liability issues that we're going to talk about later on, and does have a direct impact on both off-premise and on-premise operators. Cocktails to go in June of 2020, HB 2682, which was the temporary law, which Adam was referring to earlier today. This allows bars and restaurants, because they were literally dying on the vine, and they needed sources, other sources of revenue in order to try to stay alive. So the cocktails to go temporary measure is put into place, as Adam made it very clear to everyone on how all that works. The important take on this is all takeout and delivery sales must be performed. When this was passed, this was built right in, this is baked into the cake. All takeout and delivery sales must be performed by a 21 and over employee of the bar or restaurant, and they must be BASSET certified. Alcohol is prohibited under this law from being delivered by a third-party vendor. So keep that in mind. So bars and restaurants, it can only be your employee that delivers the alcohol to the customer at home or wherever they're delivering it to. They must be over the age of 21. They must be BASSET certified. However, in January of 2021, HB 54 becomes law. This is the retail component now of alcohol delivery, and the new law amends the Liquor Control Act. So this is permanent now. This isn't a temporary measure like cocktails to go, providing that retailers can now deliver alcoholic liquors to the homes or other designated locations of an Illinois customer. The bill states that a retailer may use the services of a third-party facilitator by means of the internet or mobile application to facilitate the sale of alcoholic liquors to be delivered to the home or other designated location of a consumer. There's no provision in the bill for the third-party delivery vendors to be BASSET certified. So now we have a situation where, since the mandate of BASSET in 2015 for all premise operators, off-premise operators have been excluded. Off-premise operators, you know what, I'm stealing a little bit of thunder away. Let's move ahead just briefly. Prior to 2020, prior to us even getting into this, excuse me one second, there were three primary responsibilities that off-premise operators had when it came to the sales of alcohol on their premise. And this is what it was: checking identification. Most retailers sell both alcohol and tobacco products, which requires checking a customer's ID in both cases. So that was definitely one of their primary responsibilities. Refuse alcohol sales to intoxicated customers. So off-premise operators, just like an on-premise operator, are forbidden by law to sell alcohol to anyone who's showing obvious signs of intoxication. And the third thing was comply. I mean, it was really that simple. Those were the three things that off-premise operators have been regulated to do for decades. I mean, long before I started teaching BASSET, because let's face it, what they're selling is packaged goods. They are not licensed for on-premise consumption. So people buy the product from their location and they go to another location after they've purchased it, wash their hands of all liability as long as everything was done with the proper identification, checking, and making sure that the customer wasn't intoxicated. Off-premise operator facts. Off-premise operators account for roughly 1/3 of the total liquor licenses issued in the state of Illinois, but have been statistically responsible for 72% of alcohol sales to a minor violation cases. Now, I did the Illinois underage compliance reports. I went from January of 19 through February of 2020 when they stopped because of COVID. I went through every single individual report and I rated both on-premise and off-premise operators that in the joint task force between the ILCC's enforcement and whether it was state or local law enforcement that got together for these compliance operations, that the total violations were 264 over that 14-month period of time, and off-premise operators accounted for over 40% of those violations. But yet, still, they had no mandate for BASSET training for their people. The 2019 licensed off-premise liquor sales in Illinois accounted for over 43% of the state's total liquor sales. In 2020, this is obvious because of COVID, they accounted for over 72% of all liquor sales. So you think about that, you know, Adam was referring to it earlier, and we've all probably can agree to the fact that not only is everybody drinking more during COVID, most of us were doing the same as well. And who were the suppliers during that time when the bars and the restaurants were closed down? It was retail. Retail was the one that was providing the product that everybody was out there looking for. But once again, no mandate for training. There was no requirement for them to train. Off-premise operators on average have less than a third of the number of employees that would require mandated BASSET training than on-premise operators. On-premise operators will attest to this fact, if any of you are on today in this town hall, that you've got a lot of folks that have to be trained on a regular basis, and not only with a 3 or 2 year rotation, but you also have the logistics of the training as well. You got to get those people to a class. That's paid time off because they're not obviously working at your establishment. Brand new hires that you bring in, if they're not BASSET certified, you have to make sure that they become BASSET certified. A lot of times it's on the operator's dime itself. And we know what the turnover ratio is in the food and beverage industry. So they're doing this on a regular basis, whereas off-premise operators don't have the same mandate. So going forward, here's the future liability issues for all operators. And I am more than willing to talk about this at length with any questions that follow up. But some of this gets pretty controversial. Redefining impairment. This is something that we talked about in the last BASSET town hall. With the legalization of recreational marijuana in the state, there have been no changes yet to the Liquor Control Act regarding the definition of impairment. This is extremely important. The definition itself is the foundation to understanding who we are and are not supposed to sell alcohol to. As all of you know, in the Liquor Control Act, the way in which selecting whether or not you're going to sell or serve alcohol to someone is based upon obvious signs of intoxication. That's the wording that's in there. It's intoxication. So alcohol consumption, alcohol effects on the body. Even the Secretary of State's office now has removed from their wording having roadside sobriety tests. Now they're chem tests. Now they're chemical tests that people have to succumb to because they've incorporated the marijuana, the recreational marijuana situation into the fact that impairment is now going to be consistent with whatever is in their system. However, the definition by itself is so important because how in the world are we teaching, whether it be by BASSET, Tips, ServSafe, or any other program out there, when you're trying to teach the signs, the early signs to someone who is selling or serving alcohol to someone, and now we have to look out for signs of someone being high on marijuana. How do you turn around and define that now? So if someone comes in absolutely stoned out of their mind, they might not have had a drink yet today, but they're just as impaired and it's just as illegal to sell to them. But how do the people that are selling or serving alcohol to them know it? Because we have no guidelines to go by. We have nothing that is in writing legally to give us a definition of impairment. With alcohol, it was so simple, 0.08 or above. Aside from the obvious signs, stumbling, slurring, which they're way past the point of early intervention. Now they've been drunk for a while if they get to those obvious physical signs. With marijuana, it's a lot more reserved. I've seen people that have smoked just an ungodly amount of marijuana, and unless you had the ability to like look at their eyeballs, you'd never know it. I mean, they talked fine, they walked fine, they acted fine. They were crisp in their communication. So it's something that we have to get to because this puts a lot of folks at a disadvantage. And liability wise, we have all sorts of issues that haven't even come to the forefront yet through the courts in a civil nature because of not having these things at hand. Number two, alcohol sales to marijuana impaired. This is kind of what we just talked about. For decades, we've talked about it's unlawful to sell or serve to anybody who's showing obvious signs of intoxication. This is included 0.08 or above. However, with recreational and a refined definition of impairment currently unavailable, what are obvious signs to be considered now? I have been struggling with updating our programs to try to put in this wording, because if I'm wrong in the way I describe it from the way it ultimately is described by law, when it's eventually gotten to, there could be liability issues there for me, because impairment by marijuana has a lot of different definitions to it, and a lot of different steps that you can take to try to find something out. But once again, we don't have a guideline to go by. Bulk alcohol sales. Retailers who are already subject to selling bulk amounts of alcohol to one customer will now be faced with an even greater challenge with deliveries. When we talk about HB 54 and retailers now being able to deliver to the home, I didn't see anything in there, and none of the people that I've talked to that were associated with that bill, there is no wording in there as far as amount. So when you go to, for example, Costco or Sam's Club or Binny's, and you're looking to buy alcohol in bulk, so you want to go there and you want to pick up 12 bottles of wine, or 5 cases of beer, or whatever you're doing. In the old days, when I say the old days, the way that things were done just a couple of years ago, if you had someone that came into a retail establishment and they were looking at picking up, let's say, 10 cases of beer, and you carded them, they gave you their identification, and they had just turned 21. I mean, they were 20, they've been 21 for a matter of months, or maybe they're even on the early side of 22. That retailer would know, or should know, through the training, that there is a good chance that with this amount of alcohol, that a portion of that alcohol is going to make its way to underage people that are consuming it. What winds up happening, though, when we have third-party delivery now, and mind you, the third-party delivery, once again, for retailers does not have to be BASSET or otherwise certified. They have to be over the age of 21, but your Grubhubs, your DoorDash, your Uber Eats, they do not have to be BASSET certified. So now you're turning over large amounts of alcohol that someone is ordering up to a home, and that delivery driver, upon approaching whoever is at that front door, as long as that identification checks out, why in the world would they question whether or not that person is entitled to the alcohol in which they just ordered? Chain of possession. For retailers, the new law appears to shift alcohol sales liability to the third-party delivery providers. Here's where there's a big problem. Now when alcohol is sold, it will be the responsibility and liability, this is the way that the law has been written, guys, of the third-party company to check IDs, look for signs of intoxication or impairment, and make sure that the alcohol is not going to someone who legally shouldn't have it. How will that work, however, when on-premise operators work under the point of origin law? And let me explain that. The vast majority of you know this. If a bar or a restaurant gets busted for selling or serving alcohol to an underage person, to an intoxicated person, and let's say that person is being served by a server on the floor, so a waiter or a waitress has been taking the alcohol to that table. Yes, if in fact that waiter or waitress was selling to a minor, there is going to be a penalty for that. But when it comes to the liability of the issue, it is the point of origin of the alcohol itself. So it goes back to the bartender. It goes back to the place where the alcohol originated. In a retail scheme, it's the clerk. The clerk is the one that did the carding. The clerk is the one that made the decision whether or not to sell the alcohol to this person before the alcohol goes out. If chain of possession now gets passed along to third-party providers that do not require any kind of formal training whatsoever, I really am deeply concerned as to what those civil lawsuits look like. And legal may be able to attest to this when I'm done speaking today. But it's going to be a mess. It's going to be an absolute mess. And if retailers think that they're going to be off the hook because they've now passed this along to a third-party provider that is supposed to be the one taking responsibility, guess again. In a civil lawsuit, if any of you have ever been through one, unfortunately, a couple of my places were over the years, everybody gets named down to the dog that was on the corner before that lawsuit begins. And then they begin by process of elimination. And it's going to come down to not only who can they prove is likely the more responsible party, but who's got the deepest pocket. So if it's the Grubhub delivery guy and Grubhub itself, yep, that's a big target. But if it's a major retail chain, grocery store chain or the likes that is behind it as well, you can bet your bottom dollar then in civil courts, they're going to come up as well. BASSET certification for delivery, like I talked about earlier, on-premise operators are only authorized for employees to deliver alcohol from their establishments. Those employees must be 21 and be BASSET certified. No third-party delivery services that off-premise operators are now able to use are required to be BASSET certified. So once again, we have this double standard, and it just has been applying all along. Talking about the double standard, where does the disparity in mandated requirements for alcohol sales go between off-premise and on-premise operators? One of the things that I've been deeply concerned about, when we go back to the statistic I showed you earlier, that 72% of the underage sting operations have been attributed to off-premise operators. If I am an operator, I own 2-3 restaurants, and I've got 150 employees between those 2-3 restaurants. And I have to train my people, and it's quite expensive to do so. And the logistics are challenging at times, but I do it. I'm in full compliance all the time. I never violate. The police are never at my place. I've got a high reputation in the community. I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do. But the liquor store on the corner has been busted twice in the past 14 months for 2 violations. Where is the fairness in that? And that's one of the things that we've been screaming about ever since the mandated BASSET was passed. If I'm that restaurant operator, I have a serious problem at the double standard between what I'm supposed to abide by and follow and what someone else that's not following the rules doesn't have to abide by and follow. So this is something that is yet again very challenging to us. Just throwing this out there, people told me that I was crazy 20 years ago when I brought this up. The NTSB has been, through all of their studies, been recommending the drop in the legal blood alcohol concentration level from 0.08 down to 0.05 nationwide. They've been looking for this. Now, Utah was the first state to incorporate this in 2017. It is 0.05 in Utah at this point. Here's the thing. I've been in a lot of think tank meetings over the past, industry-related think tank meetings over the past 14 months. And one of the things that keeps getting brought up, especially by some of the politicians that are out there, if the federal government were to legalize marijuana tomorrow, if they were to turn around and say, okay, it's no longer a controlled substance, we're going to legalize it, it's going to open up the doors to all of the legitimate banks and financial companies in order to come in and now be able to regulate the industry financially, which also means that you're going to see a plethora over time. Not only will eventually all 50 states adopt it. Why? Because the tax revenue coming back from it is just too lucrative. They're seeing the monies that other states are collecting, and they're going to want in on it. Once that occurs, recreational marijuana now becomes mainstream. Once recreational marijuana becomes mainstream, it's going to start being sold like it's mainstream. So that means you're going to start seeing certain retailers out there, certain operators out there that are going to adopt selling it just like they would cigarettes, no different. And the compromise these think tanks have been arguing is the compromise in the end is going to be marijuana gets legalized nationwide and becomes mainstream, but now the blood alcohol concentration level of 0.08, which has been the metric for decades, now the compromise is it gets dropped to 0.05 because the overall argument is you can't have it all. You either want legalized marijuana where everybody has the opportunity of using it, or we stick with the old system and your BAC level stays here. You can't have it both. So if marijuana is out in the street, we got to drop the BAC level in order to equalize this out. There's lots of law enforcement lobbyists out there that are advocating for this as well. So once again, 20 years ago, people thought that legalized marijuana was absolutely never going to happen. We went into medical and now we went into recreational. And it's just a matter of time. And we all know this. It's just a matter of time before it gets adopted by everyone that's out there. So off-premise, reasons to BASSET train. I deeply encourage all instructors watching today. A lot of you I've trained myself. Some of you have gotten your licensing through other means, but it doesn't matter when it comes to trying to encourage off-premise operators to get their people BASSET certified. Here are the things that you can use as a foundation to try to convince them it's in their best interest. Number one, it empowers employees with knowing the facts and the laws regarding alcohol sales. Nothing is better for an operator than having educated employees. I never understood the fight for educating people on things that they didn't know before. As trainers, you all know, if you ask the question in class, give me the top two signs that someone is in the early stages of becoming intoxicated. What are always the top two answers we get? Stumbling and slurring. And we all know that by the time somebody's stumbling or slurring, they're almost twice the legal limit. So, by educating people and showing them myths and misnomers and things that they were following before that they really shouldn't have been, it just makes for a stronger employee in those circumstances. It greatly reduces business liability. How could it not? We're teaching people what is and what isn't and how to handle themselves in those situations. It teaches your employees how to handle confrontational and controversial alcohol sales situation. A lot of times you've got folks that are in these really, really hard predicaments. I remember, and I'm not going to name the town and I'm not going to name the operation, but in my early days as a bartender, I worked in a town in the suburbs of Chicago where the chief of police used to come in and get hammered in our operation on a regular basis and drive home, literally all the time. And it put the owner in a really, really precarious situation because this was the chief enforcer of the town that you're now supposed to enforce. So, what do you do when you're in precarious situations like that? Well, that's part of the training. We're trying to show you some of the options that you have at those moments. It can lower your dram shop insurance premiums. This isn't a guarantee. Not all carriers are going to lower your premiums based upon you providing training and certification to all your people, but a lot of them out there will. And it's yet another advantage that operators can have. It projects responsible and proactive business practices of your brand to your customers in your community. I can't say this enough. Places that have been, and I've been doing this long enough, places that are continuously busted. The cops are there all the time. Most of the problematic situations in the neighborhood are coming from this place. I mean, what does that project onto your community? What does that project onto how your business or your brand is looked at? By taking proactive approaches like this, you're really ensuring that you're showing the people in your community you're trying to do something about this. Doesn't mean it's 100% foolproof. It doesn't mean that you're never going to have problems again. It means that you're taking as many steps as you possibly can to ensure that things like this don't happen as often as you can make that a reality. Ongoing training will keep you and your staff informed on any new changes to national, state, and local laws concerning alcohol sales. Case in point, right now, we have a room full of experts, all of you. Last I checked, 60 plus of us in this room right now, that we're all having to constantly check and see what's changed yesterday, today, and tomorrow, because things are moving so fast. We're having a hard time keeping up. Can you imagine? Pass that now down to the average operator out there. They have no idea. They're trying to focus on staying alive right now or pulling themselves out of the other side of this pandemic. They don't have time to keep up with this kind of stuff. We do. That's our responsibility. And that's yet another incentive for all of them to take the training and to not ignore it, because it's just a matter of time, guys, in my personal opinion, where it's going to be mandated for everybody anyway. The more we start getting into the weeds with the recreational marijuana, now we have, home delivery services for off-premise operators. I think that even if the state doesn't take a blanket mandate for the entire state, you're going to see that 41% for the local statutes, for the local communities, rise up to 60, 70, 80%, because they're just not going to have a choice. There's just too much coming at them from too many different directions. So let me stop sharing. And I will be open to any questions that anybody has.
Well, Charlie, that was great. You always catch all the blind spots and you always look at the big picture. Great presentation on that.
Thank you.
Thomas, we'll go to you.
Yeah, Charlie, real good question that stood out to me. I like your position where you stated that those third-party groups like Uber Eats, because I'm in the hospitality industry aside too. I'm a manager in food and beverage, and I'm out there, and that they don't have no responsibility. Has there been any push for them to have a social responsibility to Uber Eats or Grubhub to start training their staff, so having some sort of contribution to society for responsible alcohol service, either nationwide? Adam, too, have you noticed any of that? Any push for them?
Well, I know your certificate. So I know your certificate. Adam, you want to go first? You want?
I've heard talk about it, but I haven't seen any action by anybody. It's been pretty, slack about it. I mean, frankly, as Charlie said, there's so much going on. It's hard to keep up with all the different things that they want to accomplish. So it's not something that public health has really taken a big step on or really done anything on. But I'm sure after a few horrible incidents, they'll raise their arms and say, oh my God, we got to train these people. So it's going to take a disaster for people to get off their duffs and do things.
Doesn't it always?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they make you feel like they're only up for profits, and as it is a double standard, it's just not fair to, other sectors of the industry, and they could just go out. It's really hypocritical in a way.
It's so true.
Yeah.
People do the right thing, establishments want to do the right thing, and they get no credit for it. So,
And Bob, go ahead.
yourself, Bob.
Okay.
Bob, your mic is muted.
He's muted.
Okay, now we got you.
Oh, okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just start. There are about 4 states that have regulated the delivery services, and even in those states, the language and the writing to keep the restaurants going, it's helped them a great deal for the outside service and drinks to go. And that's just a dilemma of the pandemic that's completely changed the ability of the restaurants to make revenue to keep going. So that delivery service is one that that it's a shame that they have that and then are not required to have the training. And that might go to the litigation down the road that maybe the cities are at risk because they allowed that service to occur. So, you might have the deep pockets go for the responsibility of the city to have done something to protect the people down the road. The other thing I was going to mention is the nightclub, the E11 nightclub. The DJ said it was a chemical assault from Osama bin Laden, and that caused the trampling, I believe. And that's where the people were died, was from the trampling, and the DJ's recklessness caused that. And a lot of trampling situations are shooting and or statements made by the DJ that create more of a panic in certain situations. So it's interesting to see the origin of where the lawsuits are started at times.
Okay.
And I was, this is Michelle. I was going to add that after this, after we answer questions on this topic, we'll have Avi also kind of give our Schoolhouse Rock kind of version of the legislative process, because everything that you've brought up, Charlie, it relates to the home delivery, and then, cocktails to go, that sunset or possible extension of that sunset. The disparities that you've pointed out, there's still time to address those. And so we'll go over kind of the legislative process and again, briefly, so that if you want to take action after this town hall, you can you have the tools to know how to go about to do that.
Okay. All right. Should we get right into Avi? Avi Zasuk is been one of our legal staff members, and he's just been, like I said, a great legal mind, and he knows the process very well. Even in a short period of time, he just picked up on a lot right away, and a lot of us on the staff, we go to him, and he's been a great asset to the team. So, Avi, if you can go ahead and take it away.
Sure, let me try and pull the PowerPoint too, because why not, right? Let's see if it works. And I want to, first off, I want to thank all of you, because ultimately my job is immensely easier if you guys do your jobs, because one of my jobs is serving as the in the role as the in enforcement, and issuing violations, and litigating violations against licensees. And the more people who are the more of you who are doing your job, the more the information you get across, and the licensees who actually who learn that information, the less likely I have to deal with it down the road. So want to thank you guys for that. I've got my PowerPoint up. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is kind of a little bit, Michelle asked me to prepare a little bit of like a Schoolhouse Rocks version of how of the administrative process and legislative process. So I would play the Schoolhouse Rocks clip from YouTube, but I will pass on that for the moment. But just for some information, just that's my contact information. We have two attorneys that work for us, and we both have a lot of experience dealing with alcohol regulation. So we're here to answer questions whenever needed. So just as a kind of a brief overview, liquor regulation from an Illinois perspective has three sources: federal law, state statute, administrative rules, and then local ordinance. Federal law, for the most part, was not going to affect your clientele, and that they're, for the most part, they're BASSET, serving directly to customers. So most federal law is related to the manufacture and distribution, as opposed to the direct retail sale. Most retail sale is handled at the state and local level. But just from a little bit of history, you have the Federal Alcohol Administration, the Internal Revenue Code, and the Code of Federal Regulations. And for the most part, the agency that handles that is the Department of Treasury's Alcohol, Tobacco, Tax, and Trade Bureau, which is, their website is ttb.gov. Historically, they were the ATF that everyone talks about, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, but they spun them off about 15 years ago, I want to say, because they're less into, as a lesser policing agency, more taxation. And one of the things that they do is they handle the recipes and approval of colas and the different things that make sure that the product that is being served is actually what we want on the shelves. From a state law perspective, we kind of have two primary, we have two areas. We have the Liquor Control Act, and then we have the administrative rules. There's actually two sections of administrative rules that pertain to us. There's one section which is directly related to the Liquor Control Act, and then there's a separate section which is related to BASSET. The BASSET section, I want to say it's because of historically, BASSET started as a public health issue. So the BASSET code administrative rules are actually incorporated into the public health code. So again, we have the ability to amend those if need be, but just purely from a how to find them. And also we have links to all of these on our website. And then the final aspect is local ordinances, and this kind of gets can be tricky in that every municipality has their own ordinances. State law permits municipalities to be more restrictive on their liquor ordinances than the state, but they cannot be less restrictive. The area we really do see this often, as discussed before, is BASSET requirements for off-premise establishments, as well as one of the areas we see this often is age of employment of minors. So state law limits it to that the individual who's working in the alcohol industry has to be a minimum of 18 years old, but municipalities are free to and do regularly change that to anywhere between 18 and 21 to all kinds of different variations of that. Some places say you can't if you're not 21. Others will say that you can't make the actual serve, but you can bring it to the table, or you can't pour it, but you can bring it to the table, or you can't ring up the bill. Everyone is different on that, and so the only thing I can say on that is you have to check what your local ordinances say, and this is especially important when you've got chain restaurants, chain establishments this goes to house rules as well, that when you have different chain establishments, the law might be slightly different in even though you have two restaurants that are a mile and a half away from each other, but they're in different municipalities, and what goes for one location may not go for the other. So then I guess I was asked more to talk about administrative rules, but just from a clarity background, right? The state from a state law perspective, there's administrative rules and there's state statute. State statute goes through your traditional process where it goes through the General Assembly. You have bill is proposed by a member of the General Assembly. Ultimately, it's voted on. It goes from the House to the Senate, to the Senate to the House, and then ultimately to the governor for the governor's signature. And there is as they say, they compare making legislation to like making sausage. You don't really want to know what goes on behind the scenes. And to a certain degree, as much as we as an agency would like to do things, legislation is out of our hands. It goes through the General Assembly. That's where you, as the industry members and the people who can talk to more constituency, encourage your constituency, more constituency to to discuss the changes to the actual state law. Now, administrative rules are slightly different. Administrative rules are actually created by state agencies. And the purpose of them is to set forth processes for how the agency interacts with the public. So an example would be an agency that holds hearings. They are supposed to set up rules for those hearings. The agency is able to clarify things that might be ambiguous in the law. And some agencies will do this, say, for example, the Liquor Control Act is not them, but you might have a licensing statute which just says that the agency will set appropriate fees by rule, right? And then the agency will decide what is an appropriate fee, to make sure that they're covering their expenses. That's one of the examples, and that's where we are now. Rules have the effect of law, right? Unless they contradict state statute. But the other thing about rules is that they're not passed by the General Assembly, but they are approved by a special legislative committee. So they are at the discretion of the agency to put together. So then how do we go about here at the ILCC making those rules? So the first thing we'll do is when we're when we want to update our rules or institute new rules, we're going to request written industry member input, right? on the topic. We may also, at that point in time, have, hearings to allow industry members or, public or members of the public to present oral testimony before the commission. Ultimately, our commission, and just the way that, everything is set up, we have staff, and we also have, the commission, our 7-member appointed body. So they would make a decision on what direction, and then ultimately the commission staff would draft up the text to submit it to JCAR, which is the Joint Committee on Administrative. So just a little background, what is that? So JCAR is referred to as the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. It's a 12-member bipartisan group of members of the General Assembly, 6 members from the House and 6 members from the Senate. And their task is to review agency rules to make sure that the agencies are kind of staying on point and not going too far afield. So the way it works is this is all in statute and rule. So the process is that there's what's referred to as first notice. When an agency, so in this case the ILCC, prepares a draft of a rule, we submit it to the Secretary of State for publication in the Illinois Register. And then it's published about 10 to 14 days after we submit it. It's not, at that point in time, it is not rule yet. It doesn't have any force and effect. All it is a publication where it's basically our intent to publish. Then we also will post that rule on our website. And then there is a minimum 45-day period where members of the public can submit comments to the rule. And those comments are submitted directly to the ILCC for review. Then after that 45-day period ends, there is, we would do a few things. One is we're obviously going to post those comments to the rule on our website, as well as the actual rule, the actual proposed rule. If necessary, we would hold additional hearings to hear testimony on the rule. And then based on the comments and the hearings, we would make any corrections or changes that we deemed appropriate, right? So sometimes those corrections could be, hey, you guys, misspelled something, or there should be some punctuation here. And sometimes those changes, those comments will be, we disagree with your, with what you're trying to do, right? We don't think this is the appropriate avenue. Things like that. And once we do that, once we make those changes, we then submit our what's referred to as second notice of our, with our updated rule to JCAR for their review. As part of that second notice filing, we include a summary of all the comments, and we also include a summary of the changes that we've made, and any comments that we are, either ignoring or disagreeing with. We will include a basis for that disagreement in that response. So then then the second notice period. The second notice period is actually before JCAR. So it's a 45-day period before JCAR that JCAR has time to review the rule and decide what they want to do with it. JCAR will likely hold a hearing on the rule. Now these hearings could be where they actually have questions of the agency, right, of the ILCC, or it could very much be just kind of a, we reviewed it up or down. They also can extend that time period for an additional 45 days. But one of the interesting things about second notice is that once the rule is at second notice, it can only be changed by agreement with JCAR. Additionally, the hearings before JCAR, the public does not get to comment, right? It's not like a public hearing before a committee in the regular General Assembly where public could give testimony, public could make comments. Those comments are already done. The only participants in that hearing are the JCAR members and the agency representatives. Following that hearing, there may be some back and forth agreement on changes, and what will end up happening is either after second notice, JCAR will either approve the rule, object to the rule, or they may object to certain aspects of the rule and say, hey, you can approve certain parts of it, we're not going to approve other parts of it. Or what they will do is they'll allow the notice period to lapse without either an objection or an approval. Once that happens, the ILCC has up to a year from when the rule was originally noticed to formally adopt that as a rule. And that's through by sending it to the Secretary of State for formal adoption. Once that's published, the administrative rule gets published on the website, and at that point in time, it becomes it becomes effective. For example, the most recently published rule that we went through was last October, late September, early October. We published an update to the rules for transferring alcohol between retail establishments. That was the most recent one. Before that was the updated to the of value rules. Those sections will obviously include what the effective date of that rule change is, and from that point on, they have the effective law and have to be followed. I would say thank you. I don't know if there's any other questions anyone has of me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point.
Avi, thank you so much. I remember we had to do the JCAR back when the BASSET program was coming over to the Liquor Control Commission from the Department of Alcohol and Substance Abuse. I had to go down to Springfield and I had to face the JCAR, the Joint Committee of Administrative Rules, and there's one member on there made it big, and that was Barack Obama was on the committee back then in 2000. And then we've had to do some rule updates in 2001 and also 2008 when we changed the BASSET course training times from 6 hours of on-premise down to 4, and then from 4 hours to 3 hours with the off-premise. And that was done at a time where industry was going through a period where we couldn't take people off the floor for a long time, and that way we get all the information in a 4-hour time period. So Avi, thank you so much. And if you have any questions for Avi, we can open that up here.
And I just want to make a couple of plugs. I threw them in the chat when we were talking, but with any COVID-related special exemptions that from an agency perspective in Illinois, we've been posting those on the front page of our website. So you can take a look at them. We've got an FAQ up there that at least to pass that information along to the different to your trainees, to your employees, people who are looking for information.
All right. Yes, Thomas.
And if I also just Charlie, if I can make one correction, SB 54, which allowed home delivery, is not effective until next January. And one of the things that currently home delivery is permitted subject to local approval, but you are then stuck with trying to figure out which municipalities have approved local delivery.
Right.
And even some municipalities permit businesses within their municipality, but don't want outsiders coming in.
Right.
So that's one of the things that once SB 54 becomes effective, that's one of the things that will go away, in that each municipality will not have the ability to restrict what comes into their into their municipality.
What method do you have for triggering, Abraham? What method do you have for triggering what goes to JCAR? Like the laws and all these issues that we brought up today. Do you all meet weekly and decide what rules you're going to, for suggestions from industry members about what you're going to take to JCAR, when you're going to start the next process to make changes in the laws, local ordinances? What triggers that? What decisions you make to do to which ones you bring and which ones you don't?
Right now, we have a laundry list of things to change. We keep on, adding to the list as things come up, and then, obviously, because JCAR is JCAR meets monthly, even when the General Assembly is not in session. So that's not something that we have to worry about, and as much as we would like to say that it's not, there is a little bit of politicking involved with, with the rules that go through. So we can, we do have to, tread carefully, but, periodically, we kind of go through periodically. Last year, we went through a whole back and forth on quantity discounting. We sent a rule to JCAR, and they actually kicked it back to us and told us, told us come up with something better.
Avi, if someone that was in the industry, if they wanted to promote a rule or suggest a rule, how would they, what would be the best way to communicate that to the commission?
So I would say the best way would probably be just to reach out to us to write. I guess one of two things. One is if you're good at legislative drafting, right? Which we're more than happy to, if you want to give us a draft rule, we're more than happy to take that. There is officially a process in our rules for submitting a proposal to the commission. But really the easiest way would just be to, kind of put it in writing, especially if you've got, a formulated, less a broad idea and more of a specific, specific framework concept. Put that in writing and send it to, send it through to anyone on our legal team, or you can send it through Michelle, and then we'll put it through, put it on our agenda of things to look at.
Avi, is there an active plan right now to, if anything, start discussing redefining impairment in the Liquor Control Act, given marijuana being recreational legal now for a year, or is that still hasn't come up yet?
I mean, we have internally discussed it from an internal perspective. I can tell you as a, from the legal perspective, I think we all would be, I think at some point in time, some action is going to happen either as a rule or as a statute. It would be better for everyone if it actually is a statute that is defining it, than, if it's a rule. Again, it kind of gets into the, dealing with, how do you judge impairment? How do you determine it? Are you basing it off science? Are you basing it off of your gut? One of the things that, law enforcement is dealing with this right now, with, legalized marijuana is, how do you deal with determining whether or not someone is impaired from that perspective? For alcohol, you've got field sobriety tests, you've got, breathalyzer tests, you've got, obviously you have blood draws, but that really isn't the case with marijuana. And we're hoping, we do work with other law enforcement agencies, and there's there are multiple multi-state organizations dealing with liquor. And that's one of the things that is on everyone's agenda of how to deal with that interplay between marijuana and alcohol, and kind of coming up with concrete tests that will pass legal muster from a prosecutorial perspective, and at the same time are not not being just thrown out there as a we're going with our gut and we don't have any scientific basis to it.
And Charlie, I put in the chat that I'll bring up this topic to the impaired driving task force as well, regarding the definition of impairment and where it should go, or the best place, because everything that you brought up is they've been touching on it at the task force meetings. But then there's other issues as it relates to phlebotomists and, consent and, other things. So guidance in this area will be needed.
Do we know, Michelle, Lee, or Avi, other states, especially like Colorado, since they were the first in line for recreational, were there statutes that they created redefining that we could kind of use as a template or a guideline, or they haven't gotten around to it yet either? Do you know?
Not to my knowledge. I think maybe the next national conference we can try to get information like that, see what other states have done.
Yeah, I don't know. I do know that a couple of the listservs I've been on, there have been some, please provide your information, what your states do related to the interplay of marijuana and alcohol. So I think there is definitely movement in that direction. Unfortunately, over the last year, some of that sister state interaction, which would have normally happened during conferences, didn't happen for obvious reasons.
Wow. Bob.
To
Bob, I gotta
in
get
Colorado.
you.
Yeah, everybody got? You hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I got a friend of mine who's a sergeant in Colorado, or a lieutenant, but they've just started opening up locations where you can smoke marijuana in public, and that's been an interesting perspective. But I wanted to make one comment about impairment. Possibly impaired is a good way of refusing service. Why won't you serve me? To prevent your possible impairment. It seems to work out because it covers fatigue, emotion, psychological, physiological, legal drugs, illegal drugs, mental illness, and emotion. So those are the aspects of what you have to teach your employees, is not just within those two comments, marijuana and alcohol. It's if they have a mental state that's adequate, that you feel comfortable selling to them. So possible impairment is a good term, I think, that is to use when refusing service to anybody. It's proactive, it's not reactive. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Any other comments, or can we open up for discussion, question and answer period? Yeah, I was thinking, maybe some updates we can make to the BASSET curriculum. Another thing that was big in Illinois was the gaming, maybe gambling intervention. I know Adam's company has got a program specifically geared for that. Also, dealing with other issues, spotting child trafficking, issues like that, people being trained for. Any other suggestions? Any states doing anything differently? Have they added to their curriculum? Yes, go ahead, Bob.
Bonding and blending. I think that elimination of fear is the biggest thing that we've got to make people feel comfortable and want to come back in, so that they can communicate, and eliminating the fear of the covert, the fear of racial issues. It's a big aspect of trying to make people feel welcome, and to give them the opportunity to enjoy other people. And that has to be open communication and treating people with dignity and fairness. And I think that courses have to be able to make sure that customers are treated the same, that there's not one treatment for first class and a second treatment for second class people, and making that determination. So you want to have a consistency in the way that you treat everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, Lee, one suggestion too is about increasing safety. I know we had a town hall about 4 or 5 years ago, so local, when we were implementing the free BASSET training. And there was a gentleman that you had speaking that had a program. It was called Safe Bar. I think it's in Canada, but it had to deal with, because right now in Illinois, especially in Chicago in that area, the propensity for violence is really taking off. Sometimes alcohol is alleged to be, in the incident, and servers and bartenders are facing far more than we think when you're actually selling and serving. And you're in front of a person and you're having a situation that could be escalating, and it's getting far more dangerous now. So having some guidelines to deal with the safety issues, especially when it comes to, some restaurants and bars don't have the blessing of having a bouncer or a security team member. Then you have to face an individual that's had too much, and now with marijuana coming into play, I think some nice safety measures programs would be great, to start blending in and dealing with these situations.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, yeah. And I noticed some restaurants, is hiring security, having someone at the door there just to kind of, just a mere presence can keep the peace, and if someone think twice about causing any trouble. Okay, and Bob,
one thing on that security issue, not a security issue, but at least in Illinois, marijuana and alcohol cannot be sold together, right? And I know that's in multiple states. Marijuana and alcohol cannot be sold at the same location. So at least from from our perspective, there's at least that cutoff. So you're not going into a bar and you're not smoking a joint and drinking drinking at the same time. So at least there's some sort of stopgap. Now it doesn't really help if the effects last hours, but at least we're not we don't have to worry about that at the moment. And even we've been getting questions about things like CBD. And right now, our position has been that CBD mixed with drinks is prohibited until the FDA says that it's not. So.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? All right, Bob.
Yeah, just the aspect of security with the issues of police responsibility and the defunding of police departments, especially late at night. There's a big issue of how much security you need to maintain safety in your establishments. And that's going to probably be, for late night venues, one of the biggest costs that owners are going to have is having enough people to maintain a safe environment. And that's really not been addressed or talked about, but that in itself is security. There's a great company with Bob Smith and Manny that's out there. It's nightclub security, if for bigger venues. But I'm just saying that the training for security staff is an imperative for safety, and the more training you get, the less problems you'll have.
I like that. More training you get, less problems you'll have.
Yeah, it's not how much it costs you, it's how much it saves you.
Yes. Okay. All right, and then whatever. Okay, I think we had another question in the chat. Okay, is there any wording in the recreational statute about edibles being used in the establishment selling alcohol? Avi, have you ran across that at all?
Well, they can only be sold in Illinois. The marijuana can only be sold at licensed dispensaries, and licensed they can only go from the dispensary to a private citizen, right? They can't then go off to a retail establishment who wants retail establishment. And since the dispensaries can't obtain liquor licenses, therefore they can't put the edibles can't be used in alcohol. In alcohol.
Okay.
Unless they want to be charged with the unlawful sale of drugs.
Yes. Then one of my local One of my local trainers here, Rachel Nicholas, came up with a good question here about, coming from venue with a full-time security staff. I can verify that training provided for security staff can be vague about best practices, and BASSET would be a great additional resource for safety training. Yes, absolutely. And of course, yes, it is mandatory for security detail, those checking IDs. Must be BASSET trained, but I feel also those just being in there, not checking IDs, just being there to, crowd control, watch the place, intervene when necessary, should have the training too.
Lee, Lee got a question. This is just a request because this is not the platform for it right now. But at some point, I don't know if the commission can do a meeting just specifically with the BASSET trainers in Illinois, so that we can discuss some of our concerns going on in the industry with our training and just some of the needs that that we have in terms of tools and resources and so forth. This is not the platform, but at a certain point, I'm hoping that we can get a meeting as a such like that, whether it's on Zoom or I know we're not going to be in person, but we can get something on Zoom and get that going, because there are just a lot of still some other issues that's just specific to BASSET trainers I think we need to address here in Illinois.
Okay.
Michelle, maybe on that topic. Maybe we could include BASSET as one of the state of the industry speakers.
Oh, that's a great idea.
For a future meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
we have, for those of you that haven't ever attended our commission meetings,
And you should.
or have watched them online, one of the things that we do include as part of the meeting when we have the time, is a state of the industry where we invite a different member of the industry, manufacturer, distributor, retailer, to speak to the commission and just kind of explain what's going on from their perspective. So I think it definitely was something that we could include, a representation from the BASSET industry at one of our state of the industry presentations. And Michelle is the one who's responsible for organizing that. So talk to her.
Okay. All right, Bob.
Yeah, just a real quick one. For most of the security staff that I work with, the most important aspect that they've got to be able to answer in any situational response is, what do you say when you ask them to leave? If you never ask, you're going to have a higher problem. You also have to give the customer the opportunity to solve his own problem. And little things like that make a big difference when you're dealing with at-risk situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also with that aspect about asking them to leave, you got to kind of wonder, okay, what are they in a good condition to get behind the wheel? Are they going to walk down someplace? They're going to fall. There's also a risk there too to take in consideration, and that's why one good thing has been the ride sharing, and I know the drunk driving numbers gone down because of that. And there's a time period 3 years ago I did Uber for a while, and I was surprised of all the intoxicated folks I was picking up at some of the local establishments out here. But it's better that I got them home safely. But still, the establishment should have been staying within the law and not over intoxicated persons. And again, just at risk of just making sure they get home safe. That's also another responsibility too. Yeah, Bob.
I started with a guy named Judge Dean in Minnesota, and we got a program going for outstate, other than when you didn't have a taxi available. And we've done it for about 10 years. We're in 7 counties, and we got DWIs down 70 to 75% in the counties. So, and we made it the rides free by local funding and getting the charitable gambling institutions, the county, the establishments themselves to donate money, and it worked real good. And we had no government funding. We've been doing it for 10 years now, but for outstate, that's really a good one. And his name is Judge Jim Dean. He's in Isani County, If you want any information on that program and you're in small towns or outstate, it's a really good program. He was just voted outstanding citizen of the state of Minnesota too.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah, Ray Cordell brought up the issue of crossfading as an issue. Delayed effects of cannabis are problematic when mixed with alcohol. You know, again, that everyone's body responds differently to alcohol and marijuana. And, you know, some people are good at masking it. Some people have a higher tolerance than others. Those are just some factors always keep in mind. Okay. All right. Anything else? Anything else on your mind or want to add or? Yeah.
Charlie Mormino had a comment regarding the state social host law amended. I don't remember seeing anything amending that law, but if anyone else does, feel free. You know, if they know of something, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything either.
So I was just asking, is there going to be any amendments to the social host law once liquor delivery becomes effective in the state?
I haven't heard any discussions on that. I haven't. No.
Because for something like that, since it doesn't go into effect until 2022, they may be waiting for data to know whether what they should change as it relates to it.
Okay.
And I think on the social host law, it's also remembering who advocated for the home delivery. So, you know, those the businesses that were, you know, retail establishments were advocating for the home delivery. And I don't really know if the social host law advocates were really at that table to have, you know, put some sort of combined measuring together. I'm sure that there'll probably, you know, as people advocate for it, things will there'll be some sort of trailer option available, or when, you know, some kid goes and jumps off of a pool, jumps off the deck of his house into a pool, you know, because they were able to get home delivery, the social host law will get amended at that point.
Okay. Yeah, there was a different advocates that advocated the social host law. I remember it started out in Lake County. Up there were incidents, Deerfield incident where the two kids were at a underage drinking party. The parents were home. The two kids left intoxicated and drowned in the sewer pond, and that's what started up the social host law. So, all right. Anything else? We had some very good issues discussed here, and I got a lot out of it. And you know, and we've got to always keep learning, keep retraining. Keep up with the industry, and like Charlie mentioned, a lot of things are happening quickly, and it's hard to keep up, but we do the best we can. All right, I want to thank everyone for coming on, and like I always say to the trainers, providers, you guys are the program, and just want to thank you for everything you do, and just keep training people, keep extending your training out there, reach out to the local establishments in your communities, and that way we keep Illinois as safe as possible and keep the industry thriving. And Michelle, turn it back to you. Any closing comments? And I want to thank Adam Schaffitz, Charlie Mormino, and Avi Susuk for speaking and joining us today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And Michelle, I got to thank you for coordinating everything, getting this meeting together. And again, I said she's doing a phenomenal job. She hits it out of the park being the industry education director. Very thankful for her.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate I put this in the chat, but I really appreciate everyone's participation and engagement. Definitely reach out to me via email going forward if there are things that you see locally that you want to see implemented on the state level, and we can help you. If the ILCC is not the right venue, maybe it's your legislator directly, but either way, will let us know how we can assist. And I have the emails. I received emails from the chat to be added to the newsletter. And if you have events or if you have town halls maybe that are local or anything that you'd like to get the word out to other licensees, please send it my way as well.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.